Chapter 2239, Kite's Strength. Chapter 2239, Kite's Strength. When Shi Feng saw the Frost Monarch statistics, his expression revealed both surprise and excitement. At this stage of the game, most players wouldn't recognize the term Bloodline Lord. To put it simply, Bloodline Lords were the evolved versions of bloodline creatures. In God's domain, bloodline creatures could only use their bloodline's strength on an instinctive level in battle, but Bloodline Lords could fully control their bloodline, actively using the advantages it provided in combat. To put it into perspective, a Bloodline Lord was a player that had learned a combat technique, while a bloodline creature was a player that hadn't. Combat techniques allowed players to perform stronger attacks than normal without using skills or spells. If two players with similar basic attributes faced off against each other, the player with a combat technique would exhibit drastically higher combat power than the player without. Although Bloodline Lords were incredibly powerful, they were just as rare in God's domain. Mastering a bloodline was an extremely challenging task. Shi Feng had only heard of Bloodline Lords, he had never actually seen one in person. Encountering a Bloodline Lord was as dangerous as it was a blessing. Bloodline Lords commanded incredibly high combat power, akin to kings among monsters of the same rank and level. Fortunately, they were also guaranteed to drop a bloodline when they died. During Shi Feng's previous life, hunting Bloodline Lords was one of the more reliable ways to obtain bloodlines. Even the most common bloodline was worth as much as a fragmented legendary item. Players might not see any significant effects after first using a bloodline, but as they leveled up, those effects would become more prominent. Eventually, the bloodline's benefits would evolve from a quantitative transformation into a qualitative transformation. Commander, that's a level 90 world boss. Is that what we're here to raid? Solitary 9 nervously asked Shi Feng. A world boss. Even in a massive country like the Fire Dragon Empire, world bosses were extremely rare. The Empire's various superpowers had targeted a few of the world bosses within their borders, but they had only dared to raid level 60+ world bosses. Even so, they had incurred severe losses during those raids, sacrificing several teams to whittle the boss down and kill it. None of the Fire Dragon Empire's superpowers had even considered raiding level 70 world bosses yet. And yet, the monster before them was a level 90 world boss. This Frost Monarch could likely kill an MT like Solitary 9 in a single hit. He doubted that even Kola, Turtle Dove, and Yi Wumian could tank the Frost Monarch. After all, there was a full tier difference between a great lord and a mythic monster. Moreover, the Frost Monarch would be even more of a challenge than an ordinary mythic monster as a world boss. Even lifeless Thorn turned to stare at Shi Feng. Although a part of him wanted to raid the Frost Monarch as well, current players had no hope of defeating a level 90 world boss. Moreover, it was common knowledge that players couldn't use external items during world boss raids. Players could not summon powerful monsters or use magic arrays to aid them in battle. Any external tools would lose their effects and vanish after use. Players could only rely on their strength to defeat these monsters. With these restrictions in place, they'd likely need a team of level 100 players to defeat the Frost Monarch. That's right, we're going to raid that boss, Shi Feng said, smiling when he saw the anxious looks Azura's members were giving him. A level 90 world boss is very powerful, but that is only true for other teams. Our team is an exception. A level 90 world boss was terrifying. Most of God's Domain's players would despair over the Frost Monarch's nearly 1 billion HP alone. With its battle recovery, the Frost Monarch would recover 9,600,000 HP every 5 seconds. If a team couldn't deal an average DPS of -2 million, the raid would be impossible. World boss raids might prohibit external items, but they didn't disallow personal guards. Fortunately, Shi Feng just so happened to have a Dark Gold Guard and an Epic Guard. Moreover, Kola carried a fragmented legendary shield. He should have no problems tanking the Frost Monarch. Overall, Shi Feng was fairly confident in their chances of taking down the Frost Monarch. The only thing that Shi Feng hadn't expected was the Frost Monarch status as a Bloodline Lord. However, a monster wouldn't receive a basic attribute boost just because it was a Bloodline Lord. They'd simply gain the ability to use combat techniques and could exhibit greater combat power. Hence, Completing the raid was still well within the realm of possibility. Moreover, Shifeng could not afford to not raid the Frost Monarch. This was one of the few world bosses that had the highest likelihood of dropping a bronze shop promotion order. As it was, he couldn't afford the Wanderer's shop's weekly management fee, he needed that promotion order. If he couldn't make the payments and the shop was repossessed, he'd likely lose the opportunity to own a Wanderer's shop for the rest of his career in God's domain. After all, the Wanderer's shop only appeared at random. After confirming their target, Shifeng began to give his team their orders. Cola, you'll be the sub-tank later in the raid. I want everyone else to attack with everything you've got, Shifeng said. His orders confused both Azura's and Zero Wings members. They did not understand why Shifeng had assigned Cola as the sub-tank. Did they have a stronger MT than Cola? Not bothering to explain, Shifeng retrieved 2 summon guard scrolls from his bag and summoned Kite and Anna. 2 figures appeared before the raid team a moment later. One was a swordsman with 2 black iron swords, while the other was a staff-wielding summoner. Crap. A level 95 swordsman and level 96 summoner? Everyone gasped when they saw the personal guards levels. At this stage of the game, the various superpowers' best personal guards had only reached level 90, and that was after the superpowers had invested astronomical sums of money, allowing their personal guards to accept all sorts of high-ranked quests. Ordinary experts' personal guards hadn't even reached level 85 yet. When they saw Kite and Anna, Lifeless Thorn and his comrades finally understood why Shifeng dared to pick a fight with a level 90 world boss. Personal guards were far more powerful than players. At the same level, a secret silver guard could slay a Void Realm expert. If their team had the help of 2 level 95 plus peak experts, raiding a level 90 world boss would definitely be possible. However, it was extremely risky to use personal guards in a world boss raid. Unlike players, resurrecting NPCs was incredibly challenging. Not being able to resurrect one's personal guards would mean permanent death for these NPCs. If that happened, all of the time and money they had poured into these guards would go down the drain. This was also why the various superpowers didn't even dare to use their personal guards in dungeon or field boss raids. The various superpowers treated their high-ranked personal guards, in particular, like precious children. These personal guards had yet to reach their full potential. The higher a personal guard's rank was, the faster they could level up, and the easier their Tier 3 and 4 promotions would be. Hence, risking a high-ranked personal guard's permanent death while they were still Tier 2 was considered atrociously wasteful behavior. And yet, Shifeng clearly intended to use his personal guards to raid a world boss. He had to be insane. Once everyone was in position, Shifeng commanded Kite to charge at the Frost Monarch with Cola closely behind. World bosses had incredibly large perception ranges, and the Frost Monarch noticed Kite from 300 yards away. When it sensed the NPC, the slumbering mythic monster's eyes opened, glowing with a crimson light. The moment the raid team saw the monster's eyes, they felt chills crawl down their spines. The Frost Monarch's frightening aura even affected its surroundings, and after a moment, purple snow began to drift down from the sky. The instant the purple snow landed on the player's shoulders, everyone within 1,000 yards of the Frost Monarch felt an intense cold envelop them, and their movements became a little sluggish. A group of puny ants has dared to invade my land. I shall turn you all into ice sculptures to decorate my home for all time. The Frost Monarch stood and revealed a human-like sneer. With a wave of its hand, the Frost Monarch summoned a translucent, crystalline spear. Grabbing the weapon, the world boss threw it at Cola, the spear transforming into a streak of light as it tore space on its way to the Guardian Knight. So fast. Cola's expression darkened as the attack approached, but by the time he noticed the spear, it was too late to dodge the weapon. However, as the spear came within 30 yards of Cola, just about to slam into him, a figure appeared before the MT. It was none other than Kite. Without any hesitation, Kite swung his twin swords at the frost spear. Boom! As the weapons collided, the ground under Kite's feet caved under the powerful impact, forming a crater that was over 24 meters wide. As the snow and ice cleared, however, it revealed Kite still standing in his original position, unscathed. Chapter 2240, Twin Dark Moon Blades. Chapter 2240, Twin Dark Moon Blades. Solitary 9 and the other Azura members gaped in shock after watching emerge, unharmed, from the Frost Monarch's attack. Isn't that personal guard a little too strong? Cleansing Whistle exclaimed, refocusing on the battle. Even a level 90 world boss's casual attack carried devastating power. Even a level 100, tier 3 NPC would have to take care to block such an attack. After all, this was a mythic ranked world boss they were talking about. The Frost Monarch's basic attributes were even higher than an ordinary mythic monster's. However, despite being only a level 95, tier 2 swordsman, Kite had blocked the Frost Monarch's attack without taking any damage. Of all the Feingold guards I've seen before, none have been strong enough to tank a world boss. Moreover, this personal guard is only 5 levels higher than the boss and still at tier 2. Could it be a Dark Gold guard? Solitary 9 muttered, his heart pounding as he watched Kite stop one of the Frost Monarch's attacks after another. Throughout his time in the Fire Dragon Empire, Solitary 9 had become familiar with the ranks of the various powers' personal guards. It was something that many players paid attention to. Ordinary players and experts understood that they were no match for the various superpowers experts. Finding a powerful personal guard was the only way they could raise their standings in God's domain. So long as they nurtured a high-ranked personal guard, their personal guards could rival, or even surpass, peak expert strength. Even the best personal guards at this stage of the game were only Feingold rank, and only 30 or so had been found thus far. No one had found a single Dark Gold guard in the Empire. Because of this, the general public had assumed that Dark Gold guards simply didn't exist. Yet, Solitary 9 had just learned that Zero Wing had such a personal guard. If news of this spread, it would cause a huge commotion in the Fire Dragon Empire. Even secret silver guards could surpass peak experts of the same level, and although the public didn't know exactly how powerful Feingold guards were, they were certain that they could surpass Apex experts' strength. Not even 2 or 3 Apex experts were guaranteed to defeat a single Feingold guard of the same level. As for Dark Gold guards, their strength was beyond imagining. Many of the Fire Dragon Empire's players assumed that these personal guards would be invincible among those of the same level and tier, and as long as one nurtured a Dark Gold guard properly, they'd be able to explore God's domain undeterred. However, after witnessing Kite's performance, Solitary 9 decided that Dark Gold guards were even more powerful than anyone had imagined. Despite being a level 95, tier 2 swordsman, Kite could already contend with a level 90 mythic ranked world boss. The NPC's prowess was simply heaven-defying. Shifeng could tell what Azura's members were thinking the moment he saw their shocked expressions. However, he did not bother to explain the situation, only responding with a chuckle and a grin. Kite was indeed a Dark Gold guard, but even among Dark Gold guards, he was exceptional. Now that Shifeng had used soul strengthening on the NPC, Kite's combat power had risen, as well. Most importantly, the black iron swords Kite wielded were the Dark Moon Twins, a fragmented legendary weapon set. It was a set Kite had obtained after completing an epic quest in a secret land. Even if Kite combined the strength of 2 attacks, he wouldn't have blocked the Frost Monarch's attacks so easily without the Dark Moon Twins. He would have definitely taken some damage after blocking those attacks. When Shifeng had discovered that Kite had obtained the Dark Moon Twins, he had been incredibly jealous, but since the set was reserved for NPCs, he couldn't have used them even if he had taken them from Kite. With Kite acting as the lead MT, the rest of the raid team moved within 50 yards of the world boss without issues. They promptly bombarded the Frost Monarch with attacks. However, when Kite moved up to the Frost Monarch, the world boss stopped throwing its spears. Instead, the Frost Monarch wielded its weapon with both hands, sweeping the spear in a horizontal arch against the personal guard. The weapon was as thick and long as a large tree trunk, and the Frost Monarch easily reached targets that were over 20 yards away. As the spear swept across the battlefield, the melee players in its trajectory felt their hearts skip a beat. The Frost Monarch's long reach made its attacks impossible to dodge. Moreover, that horizontal sweep carried far more power than the Frost Monarch's ranged attacks. Everyone within 50 yards of the world boss felt suffocated as the wind the attack generated assaulted them. It felt as if the attack had created a vacuum. However, Kite moved to intercept the attack before it could strike any of the raid team's players. Boom! An explosion shook the battlefield, and Kite stumbled 3 steps back, a damage of over -230,000 appearing above his head. The strength in the Frost Monarch's latest attack was obviously much higher than before. When the team's players saw the damage, they couldn't help but gasp. Even Cola broke out in cold sweat. If even a level 95 personal guard like Kite took -230,000 damage after successfully blocking the Frost Monarch's attack, he'd die instantly if he tried to do so without activating a life-saving skill. Of course, the system reduced monsters' damage to a certain degree when they attacked players, but even so, how could any player have higher strength than Kite? Good. He blocked it. Shifeng breathed a sigh of relief when he saw that Kite had only lost a little over 230,000 HP. Everyone, attack the boss with everything you've got. The Frost Monarch was a bloodline lord, and it could use that bloodline to increase the power of its attacks. The thrown frost spears had been a casual attack at best, and now that Kite was within melee range, the Frost Monarch had gotten serious about this battle. However, the situation was far better from what Shifeng had expected. Kite had more than 2 million HP, so losing 230,000 HP was well within his tolerance. Shifeng's reminder to attack snapped his teammates out of their daze, and they turned their attention to bombarding the Frost Monarch. The raid team's spells and arrows were the first attacks to strike the Frost Monarch's colossal form. -34,174. 00. -31,647. 00. -17,548. 00. When these players saw how much damage their attacks dealt, they felt like crying, especially Azura's members. Although Zero Wings members didn't deal astounding damage, they still dealt over -30,000 with each attack. Azura's members, on the other hand, dealt less than -20,000 with their attacks. When they normally fought level 80 monsters, they easily dealt more than -50,000 damage. The damages they dealt were little more than pelting raindrops to the Frost Monarch. Fortunately, not everyone's damage was so low. A few attacks were particularly eye-catching, originating from Shifeng, Fire Dance, Gentle Snow, and Zhao Yueru. Zhao Yueru's fire-type spells were especially effective, dealing bonus damage. In addition, she forcibly elevated all of her Tier 2 spells to Tier 3. As a result, every one of her attacks dealt over -150,000 damage to the world boss. Her overall DPS was even higher than Shifeng's. Azura's members were thoroughly stunned. Zhao Yueru was doing the work of 10 Azura members right now. Even so, the Frost Monarch's HP bar hardly moved. Commander, killing this boss with our current damage is going to be a problem, Lifeless Thorn shouted as he watched the Frost Monarch's HP bar. Even after such a long fight, they hadn't even dropped the world boss's HP by 1%. At this rate, they'd die from exhaustion before the Frost Monarch could kill them. Although the raid team's DPS was relatively high, the Frost Monarch's attack range was too vast. Moreover, the Frost Monarch's extraordinary strength did not permit the slightest mistake, since the lightest touch from its spear could kill a player instantly. As a result, the team's players had to allocate much of their attention to dodging the world boss's attacks, which prevented them from maximizing their DPS. We should have a good hold on its aggro by now. Shifeng was well aware that their team lacked DPS. They were fighting a level 90 world boss, after all. How could a half-baked team like theirs deal enough damage to defeat it? Shifeng then turned to Anna and said, "You can begin." Chapter 2241, Anna's Might. Chapter 2241, Anna's Might. Once Shifeng gave the command, Anna raised her staff and began to chant an incantation. 2 gigantic magic arrays, both with a 30-yard radius, appeared beside Anna, one pitch black and one silvery white. The instant these 2 magic arrays appeared, the surrounding mana rapidly gathered to Anna. What a powerful spell! Astonished, Lifeless Thorn turned to look at the personal guard, who had remained idle near the rear line thus far. Although he wasn't a magical class player and wasn't so sensitive toward mana, he had seen powerful NPCs cast their spells before, yet not even the Tier 3 NPCs he had seen could manipulate this much mana with their spells. Normally, the amount of mana a spell manipulated was indicative of the spell's strength. The more mana the spell affected, the stronger the spell would be. In other words, the spell Anna was casting was even stronger than a Tier 3 magical class NPC's spells. Meanwhile, Yang Ya, a druid, could detect mana far better than a berserker like Lifeless Thorn. In fact, her ability to perceive mana could be considered above average among the many magical class experts on the raid team. She specializes in both light and darkness. Yang Ya stared at Anna for a moment, a little surprised. Normally, magical class NPCs and players only specialized in one element. For example, some elementalists specialized in fire-type spells, while some specialized in ice-type. Although elementalists could use other element spells, those spells were generally weaker than those of the caster's main element. And yet, Anna was absorbing a frightening amount of both light and darkness-type mana from her surroundings. It was clear that the personal guard specialized in both elements. Specializing in two elements wasn't as simple as being able to use spells from two different elements. A caster needed to be capable of merging both elements' spells as well. If one were successful, the resulting power of their spells would be exponential. Yang Ya could only think of two magical class players that specialized in dual element casting, and both commanded an astonishing amount of combat power. The Fire Dragon Empire's magical class players had dubbed both players dual dragons, and there were rumors that these two had the combat power to rival Tier 3 NPCs of the same level. However, she now learned that Anna was similarly a dual element caster, as well. She was even rarer than Dark Gold guards. Before anyone could shake off their shock after sensing the mana surge Anna had caused, the NPC in question raised her staff and completed her spell. 36 magic arrays appeared around the Frost Monarch, some black and some white. Yin-yang spears then shot forth from these magic arrays. Every yin-yang spear was powerful enough to tear apart space itself. When the 36 yin-yang spears pierced the Frost Monarch's body, the world boss could not help but cry out in agony. -510,354. -503,474. A series of damages exceeding -500,000 appeared above the Frost Monarch's head, stupefying everyone present. With just one spell, the Frost Monarch's HP, which had barely budged before, had visibly fallen. Anna's DPS easily surpassed the entire team's. Is she a Tier 3 NPC? Lifeless Thorn voiced his thoughts, starting at Anna. Azura's members hadn't even dealt -20,000 damage with each attack, yet just one of Anna's attacks had dealt over -500,000. She was 10 levels higher than they were, but the difference between their damage outputs shouldn't be that large. The only reasonable explanation was that Anna was a Tier 3 NPC. However, there was no doubt that Anna was only level 96 and wore a Tier 2 class insignia. This proved that Anna was only a Tier 2 NPC, which confused Lifeless Thorn. Anna's performance even stunned Zero Wing's main force members. None of them had thought that she would be this powerful. Only Shifeng remained unperturbed after witnessing the display. Anna was an epic guard. Moreover, her growth potential had risen from 105 to 113 points after she became a peak-class Yin-Yang Saint. It was the highest growth potential he had seen in any NPC. Anna had only been a level 80 NPC when she had changed classes. Now that she had reached level 96, the boons her growth potential provided were massive. After factoring in her Yin-Yang Saint class's other abilities, she had even greater combat power than ordinary Tier 3 NPCs. This was why Shifeng dared to challenge the Frost Monarch with such a half-baked team. Initially, he had wanted Anna to summon her monsters to assist in the battle, but he had decided against that since controlling so many summoned creatures would waste some of Anna's energy. That would prevent Anna from exhibiting the full strength of the Yin-Yang Saint class. Moreover, he had Kite to tank the world boss, so summoning a Lord or Great Lord into battle would be meaningless. As the Tier 2 curse, Yin-Yang Baptism, ended, Anna followed up with the Tier 3 spell, Yin-Yang Burst. This was also the legacy spell Anna had learned after reaching level 90. Anna raised her left hand as two energy balls appeared in her grip. The energy balls then transformed into beams of light that slammed into the Frost Monarch. -1,434,884. -1,441,067. Everyone was flabbergasted once more when they saw these two damages. Her damage can practically cover the entire team's. As Solitary 9 watched Anna bombard the Frost Monarch with one powerful spell after another, he gained a newfound appreciation for magical classes. Even if Azura and Zero Wings members stopped attacking, Anna could likely finish this raid by herself with the damage she could deal. She might just need a little more effort to defeat the world boss. With Anna's participation, the raid team's confidence skyrocketed. They turned their attention to dodging the Frost Monarch's AoE attacks, rather than risking death to deal more damage. Time passed quickly, and the Frost Monarch's HP eventually fell to 20%. After such a long fight with the Frost Monarch, the raid team's members had to admit that world bosses had a variety of skills. Even with Kite tanking the Frost Monarch, players had died from time to time. Moreover, the power of frost that continued to seep into their bodies had rapidly depleted their stamina and concentration reserves. Despite fighting for less than 30 minutes, they all had less than 30% of their stamina remaining. Without Anna's help, this raid would have been impossible. The boss is going berserk. Everyone, activate your berserk skills and attack with everything you've got. Shifeng shouted when the Frost Monarch's frost spear suddenly vanished. The Frost Monarch would become even more terrifying when it went berserk. It would directly manipulate the power of frost around it to layer its attacks. Normally, a team would need around 6 MTS to stop these layered attacks, but among the MTS present, only Kola was capable of surviving one of these attacks, and that was if he had already activated his berserk skill. The world boss would instant kill the rest of the MTS, whether or not they had activated their berserk skills. The only option they had left was to kill the boss before it slaughtered the team. The Frost Monarch bellowed as soon as Shifeng finished issuing his orders. The power of frost began to grow turbulent as it gathered to the world boss. Not only did this significantly increase the Frost Monarch's defense, but it also manifested 6 gigantic hands of frost energy around the world boss. These 6 gigantic hands began to swat at the offending players. Every hand was as powerful as the frost spears the Frost Monarch had thrown at the start of this raid. Only, the hand's attack speed wasn't as high as the frost spears. In exchange for the reduced speed, the hands had a much larger attack range, with each possessing a 12-yard radius AoE. The moment the 6 hands descended, 3 Azura members died instantly. However, the Frost Monarch's increased defense shocked the raid team's members far more than the 6 gigantic hands. They had already activated their berserk skills, yet they dealt less damage than they had earlier. As expected of the Frost Monarch, its famed defense wasn't an exaggeration. When Shifeng's sword struck the Frost Monarch's body, his entire arm went numb from the impact. Getting past the Frost Monarch's frost armor with dark gold weapons had already been quite difficult, and now that it had entered its berserk state, even Shifeng's killing ray barely left a scratch. As several more players died, Shifeng knew that he couldn't afford to hold back, and he ordered Anna to use Summon Angel. Within seconds, a spear-wielding Valkyrie dropped from the sky, and everyone felt their bodies grow heavier as her horrific aura washed over them. Before anyone could react, the Valkyrie had appeared before the Frost Monarch and swung her Spear of Thunder at the world boss. Peng! The Valkyrie's spear sliced through the Frost Monarch's armor like a streak of lightning before cracks began to form across the previously indestructible ice armor. The Frost Monarch cried out as it stumbled several steps back, and a damage of over -6 million appeared above its head. The Valkyrie was even several times stronger than Anna. When Azura's members saw the Frost Monarch stumble backward, their jaws nearly hit the ground. The Valkyrie's attacks were extremely fast. Even after transforming its 2 hands into sharp blades, the Frost Monarch had failed to defend itself. It had been forced to use the 6 gigantic hands it had summoned against the Valkyrie's attacks. However, a Tier 4 Valkyrie was no easy opponent, and her life rating was considerably higher than the world boss's. Even while using the 6 colossal hands to protect itself, the Frost Monarch took one hit after another. The world boss was utterly helpless against the Valkyrie. When the Valkyrie's 10-second duration was almost up, she went berserk and used Thunder's Judgment. A purple lightning bolt then shot down from the sky and through the Frost Monarch's body, dealing over -15 million damage. Good. The boss is heavily injured. Everyone, focus on your attacks. Shifeng hurriedly shouted as the Frost Monarch's aura weakened. The surviving raid team ignored the world boss's 6 hands and desperately bombarded the monster. 12%. 10%. 8%. As the Frost Monarch grew closer to its death, it began a frenzied slaughter. By the time there were less than half of the original 200-man raid team, the Frost Monarch had 2% of its HP remaining. Gentle Snow, Zhao Yueru, and Violet Cloud stopped holding back and used their strongest moves. Myth of Light, Frost Flame Hell, Dimensional Fracture. As these attacks struck the Frost Monarch, its HP bar visibly shrunk. Die. When the world boss had less than 1% of its HP left, Shifeng activated Divine Providence, Flame Burst, and Lightning Slash. I am immortal, human. You will not get away with this. The Frost Monarch snarled, its voice echoing throughout the purple frost field, as its HP fell to 0, and its crystalline body crumbled to the ground. Chapter 2242, Frost Monarch's Loot. Chapter 2242, Frost Monarch's Loot. The instant the Frost Monarch died, everyone's experience bars exploded. The level 90 world boss had provided a bounty of EXP. Lifeless Thorn and Azura's other members instantly climbed to level 80. Although Zero Wing's main force members didn't level up, having already reached level 86 and 87, their experience bars did grow by a large chunk. They had earned enough EXP to cover more than a full day of grinding. It's finally dead. As their experience bars filled, the raid team members breathed a sigh of relief. They celebrated their survival throughout the raid. When the Frost Monarch had gone berserk, its attacks had become faster as its HP decreased. They hadn't been able to keep up, relying on luck to survive. Fortunately, their overall DPS had been high enough for this raid. Had the battle continued for another 30 or so seconds, they might have lost their lives before the Frost Monarch died. Once they had a chance to catch their breath, they turned toward the numerous items scattered around the world boss's corpse. So many items dropped. We're rich. That's the loot of a level 90 world boss. That's right. Based on how much mana is gathering around those items, they must be extraordinary. The survivors' eyes glowed with excitement when they saw the Frost Monarch's loot. With a casual glance, they could count more than 10 pieces of dark gold equipment and a few rare dark gold weapons. After level 50, monsters' drop rates drastically decreased. High-ranked items like dark gold equipment became very difficult to acquire. Normally, players had to challenge 100-man, Hell Mode team dungeons to acquire weapons and equipment of such rank. Moreover, players would be lucky if a single piece of dark gold equipment dropped from each of the dungeon's bosses. One raid wouldn't even be enough to fully gear a player, not to mention a 100-man team. Most of God's Domain's expert players would be envied among their peers if they had a single piece of up-to-date dark gold equipment. Even among the Azura Adventurer team, the main force members only wore a few pieces of level 75 dark gold equipment, despite being one of the Fire Dragon Empire's top 10 adventurer teams. Yet, the Frost Monarch had dropped more than a dozen dark gold equipment pieces. Its drop rate was many times higher than the bosses in 100-man, Hell Mode team dungeons. Naturally, the weakest piece of equipment the Frost Monarch had dropped was for level 90. Even the various superpowers only dreamed of acquiring level 90 dark gold weapons, and players could likely rely on these weapons even after they reached level 100. The world boss had even dropped epic equipment. The chances of such equipment dropping in a 100-man, Hell Mode team dungeon were abysmal. Players would only have a reasonable chance of acquiring such items if they secured the first clear. All right, healers, resurrect our fallen comrades. We'll distribute the loot once you're done, Shifeng said, smiling when he saw the hunger in everyone's eyes. There likely wasn't a single player in God's Domain who wouldn't be tempted by a world boss's loot. World bosses represented the peak of power among monsters of the same level, and any random item they dropped could raise a player's strength by a considerable margin. Shifeng's reminder snapped the healers out of their daze, and they promptly went to work, resurrecting their fallen allies. Meanwhile, Shifeng turned to organize the Frost Monarch's loot. The rest of the raid team took a seat and watched Shifeng with eager looks since they didn't have anything better to do. Even Kola stared at the pile of items in the snow. The healers finished resurrecting the fallen players after a short moment, and Shifeng quickly appraised the items, sharing the statistics in the team chat. Isn't this world boss's loot a little too generous? This loot is 10 times better than the items a Hell Mode Team Dungeon's final boss drops. Zero Wings members were no strangers to a world boss's loot, so they, more or less, held their composure when they saw shared information. However, Azura's members were a different story. They were ecstatic after reading the loot's details. The Frost Monarch dropped a total of 115 items, far more than what ordinary mythic bosses typically dropped. Among the 115 items, there were 17 pieces of dark gold equipment and 3 dark gold weapons. The world boss hadn't even dropped one fine gold weapon or equipment piece. They'd likely have to raid 8 or 9 mythic bosses in Hell Mode Team Dungeons to acquire so many pieces of dark gold equipment. Unfortunately, Team Dungeons had very long cooldowns, and players couldn't raid them as often as they'd like. Furthermore, every dark gold weapon and equipment piece the Frost Monarch had dropped was top tier. This Golden Razor's attributes are just as high as an epic weapon's, Kola said, astonished as he inspected a dark gold ranked greatsword. Although the Golden Razor was only dark gold rank, its attack power and strength were on par with epic ranked 2-handed weapons. Most importantly, the Golden Razor had a passive skill that allowed players to wield it as a one-handed weapon as long as they had the required 1800 strength. In other words, players could wield a one-handed weapon with the attributes and attack power of a two-handed greatsword. This passive skill alone placed the Golden Razor at the top among level 90 dark gold weapons. Although the required 1800 strength was relatively high to ordinary Tier 2 berserkers, it wouldn't be an issue for expert players of Kola's caliber. In fact, Kola already met the requirement, despite being a Guardian Knight under level 90. He couldn't help his growing excitement when he thought about wielding a two-handed weapon alongside his shield. That's nothing. Take a look at the Extreme Frost set. It's practically made for berserkers. The 4-piece set effect even lowers the level requirement by 5 levels, on top of increasing the wearer's ice resistance by 100 and maximum stamina by 10%. The 6-piece set effect even increases the user's strength by 20% and all berserker skills by 1 tier. Blackie nearly drooled as he examined the Extreme Frost set's attribute bonuses and set effects. He even wished he had chosen the Berserker class, instead of becoming a Cursemancer. Moreover, the Frost Monarch had dropped the complete Extreme Frost set. This meant that Berserkers could equip the set at level 85, and the armor would forcibly elevate all Berserker skills by 1 tier to a maximum of Tier 3. Tier 3 skills. Tier 3 skills were far more powerful than Tier 2 skills. Zhao Yueru had already made that much clear. Despite the fact that Gentle Snow and Fire Dance had higher basic attributes, Zhao Yueru had dealt considerably more damage in the raid than her companions. Her total damage had almost been as high as Shifeng's monstrous damage. If a Tier 2 Berserker equipped the Extreme Frost set, they'd be on par with an actual Tier 3 Berserker, not including their basic attributes and physique. Indeed, this Extreme Frost set's effects are truly amazing. The Berserkers in the team have just won the lottery, Yang Tianxing chimed in. Even he was moved when he saw the Extreme Frost set. If the set were meant for assassins, he wouldn't have hesitated to replace 3 of his epic equipment pieces for the set. Tier 3 skills would drastically increase a player's combat power. If the Extreme Frost set's effects were specialized for assassins, Yang Tianxing would even be confident of contending with Sword Demon. While the team discussed the Extreme Frost set, Shifeng shared the next item's attribute panel. When they saw this item, every one of them gasped. This next item was a weapon, and one the team recognized and feared. This weapon was none other than the icy blue spear the Frost Monarch had used against them throughout the raid. Chapter 2243 Winter Spear. Chapter 2243 Winter Spear. The entire raid team had personally experienced how powerful this spear, which the Frost Monarch had manifested with condensed power of frost, was. The Frost Monarch's extraordinary strength and speed hadn't been the main reason that the raid team had struggled against it. They had relied on Kite as the lead MT, and the NPC was more than capable of surviving the world boss's attacks, taking barely any damage. Rather, The Frost Monarch's Frost Spear had been the main reason that these players had had so much trouble. Despite the Frost Monarch's focused attacks against Kite throughout the raid, it had used its attack's residual power to assault the players, sapping their stamina and concentration. This, in turn, had steadily decreased the team's combat power, and to make matters worse, they hadn't been able to block or dodge this residual power. If Anna hadn't been so powerful, the team would have died from exhaustion before they could kill the world boss. It's even possible for such a weapon to drop. Its attributes are insane. The team's berserkers have truly hit the jackpot. When they saw the Frost Spear's attribute panel, everyone on the team felt jealous. Even Shadow Sword and Rampant Blade, who both used an epic weapon, couldn't help their desire for the spear. Its attribute bonuses were just that awesome. Winter Spear, Replica, Spear, Epic Rank. Level 50, Level 100. Equipment requirement, Strength 2100. Attributes adjust according to user's level. Attack power plus 2550, Level 50. Strength plus 301, Agility plus 210, Endurance plus 270. Attack speed plus 12. Attacks carry the power of Frost. When attacking, all attacks reduce the target's stamina and concentration. Attacks have 30% chance to deal frost damage to all enemies in a 10-yard radius. 20% chance to trigger frost possession, increasing strength by 20% by 3 seconds. During this time, attacks also deal an additional 270% frost damage and reduce target's movement speed when struck by 30%. When equipped, main attribute increased by 25%. All secondary attributes increased by 15%. Reaction speed increased by 10%. Ignore levels plus 10. All berserker skill effects increased by 30%. All item level requirements reduced by 5 levels. Additional passive skill 1 dash. Chaotic battle, strength, attack speed, and movement speed increased according to the number of enemies hit. Each enemy hit will grant a 3% increase for 5 seconds. Bonus can stack to 30%. Additional passive skill 2 dash. Ice Guard, when HP falls below 50%, Power of Frost triggers to improve the user's physique by 15%, main attribute by 15%, and defend skill by 3 levels. Additional active skill dash. Frozen Century, converts a 100-yard radius into a frozen realm, using the power of frost to corrode all enemies in range. At the same time, the user creates 2 frost doppelgangers, each with 115% of the main body's strength. Duration, 5 minutes. Cooldown, 1 hour. Even Shifeng was relatively surprised to see the Winter Spear replica drop. The original Winter Spear was a legendary weapon, but even a replica would be extraordinarily powerful. The epic ranked replica could likely rival an ordinary fragmented legendary weapon's strength. In terms of attack power, this replica was even stronger than Gentle Snow's Glorious Will. The only difference between the Winter Spear's replica and Glorious Will's was that the latter could be upgraded to fragmented legendary rank, while the former could not. Even so, the Winter Spear was the best weapon under fragmented legendary rank for berserkers at level 100 or below. If current players wielded this spear, their attack power would be among the best in God's domain. Moreover, players wouldn't have to worry about fighting groups or a single opponent with the Winter Spear's effects. Naturally, Ever Berserker on the raid team grew restless after seeing the Winter Spear's attribute panel, and they all turned toward Shifeng almost as one, waiting to learn how he intended to distribute the weapon. According to Shifeng's rules, everyone that participated in the raid would have a chance of competing for any dark gold weapon. Unfortunately, those rules didn't hold true for epic-ranked weapons. Even the various superpowers treated epic weapons and equipment as a part of the guild's foundation, and not even the guild's upper echelons could claim such an item simply because they wanted it. Guilds had strict inspections and evaluations before they'd assign an epic item to their members, especially when it came to a top-tier epic weapon like the Winter Spear. The Winter Spear and Extreme Frost set will go to Lifeless Thorn, Shifeng announced after giving the matter some thought. Although he was Azura's commander, Shifeng hadn't contributed to the adventurer team recently since he'd been so busy with Zero Wing. As a result, Lifeless Thorn had taken full responsibility for leading the Azura Adventurer team and the massive Adventurers Alliance. By now, many superpowers had begun to compete for resources and player population in the Ice Crystal world. If the Adventurers Alliance wished to maintain its standing, it needed to rely on more than a flowing water realm expert like Lifeless Tom. The Alliance would need a peak expert, at the very least, to defend it. Commander. Lifeless Tom stared at Shafong, moved. He had never expected his commander to hand him the Winter Spear and Extreme Frost set. Not even Superpow's upper echelons had the privilege of using such high-quality weapons and equipment, yet despite being Azura's vice commander, he had earned the right. Adventurer teams weren't nearly as restrictive as guilds, and even though Lifeless Thorn was Azura's vice commander, he enjoyed far more freedom than large guilds' elite members. Moreover, Zero Wings members wouldn't be pleased to hear that their guild leader had given him such powerful items. The consequences were just too high. Lifeless Tom couldn't understand what Shafong was trying to do. And yet, despite carrying an epic weapon and multiple pieces of epic equipment, he was sorely tempted to wield and wear the Winter Spear and Extreme Frost set. Refusing such a generous offer wasn't easy. Naturally, Shafong understood what Lifeless Thorn was thinking. Taking the initiative, he said, "There's no need to say anything. Zero Wing isn't like other guilds. Azura may only be Zero Wing's subordinate adventurer team, but it's still a part of Zero Wing. As long as you perform well, I have no problems giving you weapons and equipment of this quality. I hope that you will use this weapon and set equipment to improve Azura further." Zero Wing was quite different than the various superpowers. It didn't have the support of major corporations, and it wasn't as attractive to expert players. If Zero Wing wanted to contend with super first-rate guilds and super guilds, subordinate, independent organizations like the Azura Adventurer team were necessary. Furthermore, if an adventurer team wasn't led by a powerful expert, it would struggle to develop. Although Azura was impressive enough to become one of the Fire Dragon Empire's top 10 adventurer teams, that was its limit. Growing any stronger would be an incredible challenge for the adventurer team. Unless Lifeless Thorn increased his strength, it would only be a matter of time before another adventurer team, one with a powerful background, surpassed Azura. If possible, Shafong wanted to help Lifeless Thorn reach the Void Realm, but doing so wouldn't be easy. One would have to improve their senses on a qualitative level, which couldn't be done by simply improving one's combat standards. If it were that easy, the various super guilds would have more than just a few peak experts among their ranks. After Shafong's comment, Lifeless Thorn turned to Zero Wings members to see their reactions, but to his surprise, none of the main force members seemed dissatisfied with the situation. They didn't actually seem to care who received the Winter Spear and Extreme Frost set. When Azura's other members saw this, they couldn't help but feel a little ambitious. As players that had chosen to join an adventurer team, they had knowingly forsaken the resources a guild could provide in exchange for more freedom. However, enjoying the freedom of an adventurer team, as well as access to a guild's important resources, was better than they could have hoped for. In that moment, Azura's members silently decided that they would become an even more powerful adventurer team in the future. Even if they couldn't obtain top-tier epic weapons like the Winter Spear, they'd still have a chance of securing ordinary epic weapons. Such a situation was normally unthinkable for adventurer team members like them. While everyone secretly envied Lifeless Tom, Shafong revealed a playful grin as he shared the attribute panel for a jade flute. When the raid team saw this item, their jealousy of Lifeless Thorn vanished. Crap. Am I seeing things? This is a flying mount. Chapter 2244, Another Flying Mount. Chapter 2244, Another Flying Mount. Upon seeing the summoning flute decorated with blue runes, every member of the raid team was ecstatic. Thanks to the flying mount that had appeared in the Sea of Death, players were no longer strangers to the concept of flying mounts. News of that mount had spread across God's domain, giving countless players a new dream of obtaining one for themselves. Even Aqua Rose and Zero Wings' other main force members, who already knew that Shafong was the owner of that mysterious flying mount, were at a loss for words, not to mention Azura's members. Except for Shafong, they hadn't heard of any player owning a flying mount at this stage of the game. In other words, This summoning flute was only the second flying mount found in God's domain. Epic weapons and equipment might be incredibly precious, but not even the top-tier epic weapon, Winter Spear, was worth 1/10 of a flying mount. They had already experienced the benefits flying mounts had to offer, and their travel speed was simply unbelievable. A flying mount could even cross a large-scale map in no more than 2 or 3 hours. Most importantly, flying mounts' combat power was incredible. Take Shi Feng's Thunder Eagle, for example. The Thunder Eagle was a bona fide Tier 3 combatant with the ability to contend with level 100 Great Lords. If they had a flying mount, they'd have their own powerful companion in battle. I won't say much about this flying mount. If you want it, fight for it. The starting bid will be 300,000 GCPs or 300,000 Azura contribution points. The highest bid wins, Shi Feng said, chuckling as he glanced at the excited crowd before him. In truth, even Shi Feng had been quite surprised to see the Frost Monarch drop a flying mount. Even a common flying mount was easily worth several level 100+ epic items. Although this Frost Bone Dragon, the flying mount the Frost Monarch had dropped, wasn't as powerful as his Thunder Eagle, it was an intermediate extraordinary flying mount. It was even more valuable than ordinary fragmented legendary items. Initially, he had intended to give the flying mount to someone of his choosing to maximize its usefulness, but everyone's intense desire for the mount had changed his mind. Hence, he had resorted to an internal auction. 300,000 contribution points was exceedingly cheap for a flying mount like the Frost Bone Dragon. Normally, he should have set the starting bid at 3 million CPS, but since this was an internal auction, he didn't mind lowering the price. Moreover, the sooner one of his players was spotted using the flying mount, the more Zero Wing or Azura could benefit. Naturally, there was no chance of some low-rank player claiming the Frost Bone Dragon. 300,000 contribution points was an astronomical amount for both Zero Wings and Azura's members. Not even ordinary core members could afford that price. Of the 200 players participating in this raid, only a dozen or so had enough CPS to bid for the flying mount. Every member of the raid team stared at Shi Feng in astonishment. They had never expected him to sell off the flying mount in an internal auction. He had even assigned the Winter Spear and Extreme Frost set to a specific player, yet the flying mount would go to the highest bidder. Most importantly, Shi Feng was actually allowing them to compete for it, not keeping such a precious flying mount for himself. No other guild leader or commander would be as generous as Shi Feng. It didn't take long for the raid team members to snap out of their daze after Shi Feng's announcement. "I bid 300,000 GCPs, Blackie shouted, placing the first bid. "In that case, I'll bid 310,000. Cola shouted, not willing to concede. "Commander, I bid 320,000 CPS. Solitary 9 shouted, unable to help himself from participating in the auction. Azura's contribution system was similar to Zero Wings, and earning contribution points wasn't easy. Of course, as one of Azura's 2 vice-commanders, he could afford to hand over 300,000 plus CPS. "I bid 350,000 CPS, Lifeless Thorn announced. Although Lifeless Tom had already acquired a top-tier epic weapon and dark gold set equipment, the idea of owning a flying mount was simply too tempting. A flying mount would also affect his development rate, so he couldn't just give up this chance. Zero Wing and Azura's members frantically bid on the Frost Bone Dragon, the price quickly climbing to 450,000 CPS. Once the price rose that high, Azura's Lifeless Thorn and Solitary 9 had to drop out of the auction. Unlike a guild, there were fewer means for adventurer team members to earn contribution points. Adventurer teams didn't have access to guild quests, for example. Now, only Zero Wing's upper echelons could compete over the flying mount. In the end, Gentle Snow had won the Frost Bone Dragon for 580,000 contribution points. Although Shi Feng didn't prohibit his players from borrowing points, they had silently agreed to rely on their own contribution points due to the importance of a flying mount. Their contribution points, after all, represented how much they had contributed to the guild or adventurer team. The player who had contributed the most deserved something as important and valuable as a flying mount. After the auction, Shifeng handed Gentle Snow her new Frost Bone Dragon summoning flute, and she rejoiced. Ideas of how to use this flying mount swam in her head. Shifeng then let the raid team members bid for the remaining dark gold weapons and equipment, and every item had been auctioned off in less than 10 minutes. As for the other items the Frost Monarch dropped, Shifeng didn't share their information or add them to the internal auction. These items touched on guild interests. The bronze shop promotion order, for example, had to be kept a secret. Moreover, since the Frost Monarch was a bloodline lord, it had dropped a bloodline. Normally, Shifeng would have let his players take a look at an ordinary bloodline. It's not like they were a secret among the various superpowers anymore, and some were even available for purchase in the World Summit's Divine Shrine. If players had enough points, they could even purchase a peak bloodline. However, the Frost Monarch's bloodline was special, and Shifeng couldn't afford to reveal it casually. Arctic bloodline, special bloodline, can be fused with a normal bloodline to produce a new bloodline. The resulting bloodline has one opportunity to evolve, and the evolution's benefits depend on the bloodline power the resulting bloodline has absorbed. The more bloodline power absorbed, the more benefits the resulting bloodline will provide. Can absorb a maximum of 100 bloodline power. Current bloodline power absorbed, 0 points. Warning: the resulting bloodline will automatically bind to the user after using the Arctic bloodline. It cannot be traded and can only be stored in the user's bag space. If the user dies, the bloodline will drop and be forever lost. System: do you wish to fuse with the Arctic bloodline? System: you have 1 hour to decide. If you fail to decide or refuse the fusion, the Arctic bloodline's power will be lost. Although Shifeng trusted these players, he had no plans to inform them of the Arctic bloodline. While the team rested, Shifeng wandered off to find a place to sit. He then agreed to fuse with the Arctic bloodline. Chapter 2245 New Bloodline. Chapter 2245 New Bloodline. The instant Shifeng agreed to the fusion, the Arctic bloodline in his bag shot through his body and began to merge with the Dark Iron bloodline. Thus far, Shifeng had been quite satisfied with the Dark Iron bloodline. Although it was only a basic bloodline, it was the perfect bloodline for melee classes, far more valuable to melee players than other basic bloodlines. In fact, Shifeng wouldn't necessarily trade the Dark Iron bloodline for a bona fide advanced bloodline if given a chance. Compatibility was incredibly important, and the Dark Iron bloodline improved his compatibility with his melee skills. It was a rare attribute. Although the Dark Iron bloodline's attribute panel didn't clearly outline how much the bloodline improved his compatibility, Shifeng had discovered, through trial and error, that his bloodline improved his skill completion rates by roughly 2%. While 2% might not seem that high, and even some epic equipment could provide a similar bonus, Shifeng's skill completion rate was already impressive. Shifeng was very close to 100% skill completion rate with his Tier 2 skills. For any other player, the Dark Iron bloodline would likely increase their skill completion rate by more than just 2%. Even so, a 2% improvement was extremely valuable for Shifeng. As God's Domain evolved into a more perfect game, higher-tiered skills and spells would become increasingly difficult to use properly. A player who had a 100% completion rate with their Tier 1 skills wouldn't be guaranteed to perform as well with Tier 2 to 6 skills and spells. Take Fire Dance, for example. When she had been a Tier 1 player, she had executed her Tier 1 skills with a 95% or higher completion rate, but after reaching Tier 2 and the Flowing Water Realm, she barely achieved a 90% completion rate with her Tier 2 skills. If she wanted to increase her skill completion rate, she had to continue her training and find more inspiration. In reality, not even Domain Realm experts fared better than Refinement Realm experts with skill or spell completion rates. Completion rates depended on a player's physical control and their understanding of the skill or spell in question. Refinement Realm experts already had precise control of their bodies, and Domain Realm experts' physical control wasn't that much better. Domain Realm experts merely had superior perception. Shifeng only had such a high completion rate with his Tier 2 skills because he had already grown incredibly familiar with the various Tier 2 skills in God's Domain. Not a single player in the game could compete with his experience in this regard. Moreover, The Dark Iron bloodline would offer greater benefits as he continued to level up and reach higher tiers, particularly as he rose through the tiers. Although he had already absorbed the Dark Iron bloodline, he couldn't yet fully exhibit the bloodline's power. Bloodline's strength was simply too great for low-tiered players like him to tolerate. He could only unlock more of the bloodline's abilities as he increased his tier. Otherwise, bloodlines wouldn't have been as valuable as fragmented legendary and legendary items, becoming one of the best tools to support God's Domain's players as they became powerhouses. As the Arctic bloodline continued to fuse with the Dark Iron bloodline, Shifeng felt an indescribable power spread throughout his body. This power felt violent and cold, the sensations mixing within him. If he hadn't deliberately concealed his aura with the Nightwalker's cape, Fire Dance and the others would have sensed his transformation. After 10 seconds, the turbulent power within Shifeng had calmed. The moment it did, the crisp sound of a system notification reached his ears. System, congratulations. You have successfully fused the Arctic bloodline and Dark Iron bloodline. The Frost Iron bloodline has now bound with you. Eagerly, Shifeng inspected the resulting bloodline. Frost Iron bloodline, fused bloodline. Increases players' compatibility with melee skills and reaction speed. Mainly improves strength, followed by agility, endurance, vitality, and intelligence. Can absorb bloodline power to evolve once. The more bloodline power absorbed, the greater the evolution's effects will be. Can absorb up to 100 bloodline power. Currently absorbed bloodline power, 0 points. So, this is a fused bloodline? As he inspected the Frost Iron bloodline's attributes, Shifeng couldn't believe his eyes. He had assumed the fusion would only improve the Dark Iron bloodline's inherent attributes, not birth an entirely new ability. The Frost Iron bloodline could practically rival advanced Bloodlinesel. The only real difference was the increased basic attributes. Fortunately, the missing basic attributes weren't that important to Shifeng. He valued the bloodline's ability far more. Especially the Frost Iron bloodline's new ability. Increased reaction speed would be significantly help Happy Smiley players. The improved reaction speed would be especially useful when fighting monsters. Unlike players, monsters' reaction speed continued to increase with their levels, which was why higher-leveled monsters were so difficult to deal with. Normally, the only way players could improve their reaction speed was by increasing their basic attributes and physique, but the resulting improvement would be minor. Meanwhile, weapons and equipment that increased reaction speed directly were painfully difficult to acquire. Now that the Frost Iron bloodline could do just that, it was easily more valuable than the advanced bloodlines players could buy from the Divine Shrine. Amazing. Truly amazing. With this boost, my reaction speed is just as fast as true Tier 3 classes. Shifeng was ecstatic when he sensed the change to his reaction speed. The Tier 3 promotion quest was far more difficult to complete than the Tier 2 version, and players' results would largely influence their future development. Shifeng had hoped to obtain an advanced bloodline before Tier 3 promotion quest to increase his chances of securing a good result. After all, his Blade Saint class was one of God's Domain's 10 Great Saint Legacies, and his promotion quest would be considerably more challenging than other classes. Now that he had the Frost Iron bloodline, he was far more confident of clearing his Tier 3 promotion quest. If this bloodline is so powerful after the fusion, just how powerful will it become after evolving with 100 points of bloodline power? Anticipation overwhelmed Shifeng as he read the bloodline's attribute panel again. To obtain bloodline power, players had to extract it from bloodline creatures or archaic species. Unfortunately, the former were incredibly rare in God's Domain. It seems I'll have to find some time to explore the Thunder God's secret land. After giving the matter some thought, Shifeng decided that hunting in the Thunder God's secret land would be the most reliable way to collect bloodline power. Although he knew where to find a few low-level bloodline creatures, the main god system wouldn't give him any chance to exploit such a loophole. His chances of extracting bloodline power from low-level bloodline creatures would be abysmal. To increase his chances, he had to hunt bloodline creatures in the Thunder God's secret land. Unfortunately, it wasn't easy to gain access to the secret land. He would need an entry pass, and entering the secret land by himself wouldn't be efficient. He'd need to obtain enough entry passes for a group of players. As a result, Shifeng decided to prioritize Zero Wing's development in the Sea of Death. However, he hadn't come to that decision simply because he wanted entry passes to the Thunder God's secret land. After level 100, the various major powers would turn their attention to the sea due to its many available resources, and if Zero Wing wanted a cut of that pie, it would have to secure a foothold in the Sea of Death as soon as possible. Thinking up to this point, Shifeng's gaze drifted to the bronze shop promotion order in his bag, his desire to upgrade the Wanderer's shop as soon as possible growing. The naval resources he obtained through his partnership with Phoenix Rain wouldn't be enough for Zero Wing to establish itself in the Sea of Death, and Zero Wing still had to deal with Starlink's harassment. Once the raid team had rested, Shifeng returned to White River City alongside his companions. Chapter 2246, Turmoil at Dragonheart City. Chapter 2246, Turmoil at Dragonheart City. Starmoon Kingdom, White River City. Hashes of light illuminated the teleportation hall as Shifeng's team returned to White River City. After Monarch Raid, they had spent almost all of their stamina and concentration. Although they had rested in the Purple Frost Field for some time, they were visibly exhausted. How strange. I'm back in the city, yet my stamina still feels like it's barely recovering. Aqua Rose muttered as she concentrated on her physical state. Fire Dance, Yang Tianxing, and the other Refinement Realm experts felt the same. Once players reached the Refinement Realm, they gained more precise control over their bodies, and when they lacked stamina, it subtly influenced their physical performance. Hence, Refinement Realm experts could sense how much stamina they had remaining based on their physical condition. Normally, players' stamina rapidly regenerated when they returned to a town or city, yet Aqua Rose and her companion's stamina had barely changed. Their stamina recovery rate was surprisingly slow. Don't worry about it. It's just the result of the power of frost that infected your bodies. Once the power of frost dissipates, you'll return to normal, Shifeng explained. Not only were high-level maps dangerous, but they also inflicted lasting negative effects on the players that dared to explore them. Even among high-level maps, the Purple Frost Field was considered a special place. All forms of energy, with the exception of the power of frost, had been expelled from the map. Not only would players' stamina deplete far faster than usual if they remained in the map for a long time, but their stamina recovery rate would also be affected. Fighting a world boss like the Frost Monarch would only make their condition worse. In their current state, these players would need to rest in a city for at least 10 hours to recover fully. Doesn't that mean that we'll have to rest for a long time, unable to do much else? Gentle Snow asked, frowning. She had just obtained the Frost Bone Dragon, and she wanted to lead a team to grind field bosses in unexplored high-level maps as soon as possible to utilize this advantage and secure a large stock of high-level equipment. Zero Wing's main force members had reached such a high level, but most of their weapons and equipment hadn't. If they had had up-to-date weapons and equipment in their competition with Starlink, securing their victory would have gone much smoother. But it can't be helped. High-level resource maps aren't like they were before, Shifeng responded with a shrug. Reaching level 100 in God's domain wasn't difficult. The true difficulty lay in obtaining top-tier weapons and equipment that corresponded with their levels. The Purple Frost Field was one of the best places to acquire top-tier level 90 equipment. Not only did the map have its own level 90 world boss, but it was also home to quite a few level 90+ mythic bosses. Unfortunately, maps like the Purple Frost Field had their own form of special energy, so grinding for top-tier weapons and equipment was even harder than normal. In reality, the Purple Frost Field's harsh environment was gentle compared to the various maps available at that level. Some environments even affected players' physiques and basic attributes. This was also why the various minor powers and adventurer teams had survived in God's domain in Shifeng's previous life. Grinding in these special maps for long periods was impossible due to their environments, and as a result, the various major powers hadn't been able to monopolize these maps' field bosses. To dominate these maps, God's domain's major powers would need a lot more manpower. This was precisely why Shifeng wanted to develop the Azura Adventurer team, using it to attract more expert players. Although Zero Wing had an incredible main force, the guild's other teams lagged far behind them. Gentle Snow's and Aqua Rose's frowns deepened. This meant that their level and mount advantages weren't as great as they had thought. Forget about farming top-tier weapons and equipment for now. You should help our other members level up. Once the power of Frost's effects wears off, you can organize teams to raid team dungeons and get our raiding progress up to speed, Shifeng said, chuckling. Collecting a large stock of top-tier weapons and equipment wasn't a walk in the park. If it were, the various superpowers would have squashed the game's minor powers and adventurer teams. They wouldn't have poured so much attention into nurturing lifestyle players and grinding for resources, either. I'll do that, then. Gentle Snow felt helpless. She had no choice but to accept Shifeng's suggestion and take things one step at a time. After their conversation, Gentle Snow and Aqua Rose left the teleportation with the rest of Zero Wing's members. They planned to take the guild's members out to power level in high-level maps. Shifeng, on the other hand, led Azura's members to the Candlelight trading firm and loaded them up with advanced mana armor kits, all-round devices, and other consumables that the trading firm only sold internally. He also instructed Melancholic Smile and her team to produce some resistance equipment for the adventurer team members to help them develop at a higher rate. Shifeng then found a special forging room before using the Abyss Pendant to teleport to Dragonheart Island. In the blink of an eye, Shifeng appeared in an alleyway in Dragonheart City's outer area. But for some reason, Dragonheart City seemed livelier than during Shifeng's last visit. Hardly any players had spent their time in the city's outer area before, but now, he noticed a large number of players in this area of the city. Moreover, most of these players were neutral race players, not human. Why are so many neutral players here? Shifeng was astonished when he saw how many neutral players roamed the street. These neutral players were very high-leveled, with most of them at level 76 or higher. There were even quite a few level 78 players. Mainstream players had just reached level 72 and 73 at this stage of the game, so these neutral players' levels were surprising. Even most large guilds' peak experts had only just reached this level. Meanwhile, Dragonheart City was located in the Sea of Death's inner region, and the closest neutral city was very far away. There should only be a small number of neutral players that would bother traveling this far. Neutral experts weren't the only players in the city right now. There were also large crowds of experts from the various major powers and many from second- and third-rate guilds. As Shifeng observed the passing players, he noticed a familiar group. It was none other than Thoughtful Rain and Blue Bamboo, who loved to vanish from the guild, and they seemed to be in the company of Melody and a few other Ninth Heaven members. Since Shifeng was still disguised as Black Flame, Thoughtful Rain and her companions quickly recognized him. "You're here, too, Big Brother Black Flame?" Blue Bamboo promptly walked up to Shifeng as soon as she saw him. Guild leader Black Flame, the half-elf Melody greeted. "Why are you guys here?" Shifeng asked, surprised. The fairy country, Melody's home country, was quite a distance away from Dragonheart Island. Traveling so far was a major challenge. "Oh, you don't know, Guild leader Black Flame?" Melody asked, giving Shifeng an odd look. "Know what?" Shifeng asked. "We're here because we've received news that a pathway to the Western Continent has appeared in Dragonheart City. All of the various major powers are heading this way to test their luck and see if they can make it to the Western Continent," Melody explained. Chapter 2247 Wanderer's Shop Promoted. Chapter 2247 Wanderer's Shop Promoted. A pathway to the Western Continent. Shifeng was surprised to hear the news. God's domain consisted of two main continents, separated by a massive distance. Even with a flying mount, it would take several days to travel from one continent to the other. To make matters worse, one would encounter many level 180 and 200 plus sea monsters and flying monsters. Even after players reached Tier 3 during Shifeng's previous life, very few people had been strong enough to travel between the continents. Normally, players would have to rely on teleportation arrays or special paths that had survived since ancient times. Take Starlink, for example. The guild must have secured a teleportation array that only it, alone, knew of. However, Shifeng had never heard of a path leading to the western continent in Dragonheart City during his previous life. Shifeng was also certain this wasn't because of a weakness in his information network or his guild's inability to learn it. If a path had appeared in the middle of a city, it would have shaken every power on the continent. The current situation was the best proof of this. Guilds from the eastern continent's various kingdoms and empires were rushing to Dragonheart City after learning of the pathway. Even the various neutral powers were making the trip. It would be very difficult not to learn of this pathway's discovery. A pathway between the two main continents represented unimaginable opportunities and wealth. The two continents had different cultures and development goals, which was why neither Unyielding Heart nor Crimson Emperor was a match for Starlink's economic development. I'm not sure about the exact details. I came here with a friend who is trying to find out more about the situation, Melody explained. Big Brother Black Flame, why don't you come with us and take a look at this pathway? Rain and I have explored so many places, but we've never visited the western continent. Blue Bamboo invited Shifeng. My friend has been in Dragonheart City for quite some time now, so his connections and information network are quite impressive. I'm sure he'll find the facts soon, Melody said, nodding in agreement. She had considered inviting Shifeng to join them as well, but it wouldn't be proper to invite another guild leader without a good enough reason. Since Blue Bamboo had taken the initiative to invite him, she might as well go with the flow and use this opportunity to develop the relationship between Ninth Heaven and Zero Wing. Zero Wing had prospered lately, and because of that, the Death God workshop had calmed quite a bit in the fairy country, allowing Ninth Heaven to develop peacefully. Since Shifeng clearly didn't know much about the western continent, she could use this opportunity to earn a favor. Alright, but I have some matters to see to before I can join you, Shifeng said after giving the matter some thought. A pathway to the western continent was indeed a tempting issue. If he could visit the western continent this early, Zero Wing could gain access to endless wealth and resources. Since Melody was trying to do him a favor, likely to earn one back, he didn't mind taking advantage of this situation. That won't be a problem. In any case, my friend still needs some time to investigate. We'll be wandering around this area of the city in the meantime, Melody said. She secretly rejoiced when she heard Shifeng's answer. Zero Wing was already incredibly strong as a guild and was almost guaranteed to become a superpower in the future. If Ninth Heaven could secure a close relationship with the guild now, Ninth Heaven would only benefit later. Once Shifeng and the others agreed on where to meet later, he hurried toward the Wanderer's shop. Due to news of the pathway, the street the Wanderer's shop occupied, which had been deserted during Shifeng's last visit, was crowded with players. Everyone was here to learn more about this mysterious path to the western continent. Although I'm surprised that someone has discovered the pathway, it has saved me a lot of trouble in luring customers to the shop. With a quick glance, Shifeng realized that most of the players on the street were experts. These expert players were either from guilds or well-known adventurer teams. Naturally, they'd have stronger information networks than ordinary experts. Shifeng had been worried about how to lure in customers after upgrading the Wanderer's shop. Without enough customers, he wouldn't be able to sell the black market teleportation slots for a good price, but it seemed that he no longer had to worry about that. He immediately headed into his Wanderer's shop. The Wanderer's shop had a total of 3 floors, and the building itself was quite old. The items it currently sold were of little value, as well. Not even ordinary players would be interested in these items, much less expert players. The only customers currently in the shop were NPCs, and when Shifeng checked the daily transaction volume, it was pitifully low. System: Bronze Shop Promotion Order detected. Do you wish to upgrade the Wanderer's shop? Upgrade. Shifeng chose to upgrade the shop without hesitation. The Bronze Shop Promotion Order sitting in Shifeng's bag transformed into particles of light and disappeared. As it did, the shop itself began to change. The changes were not visible from outside the shop, but internally, the Wanderer's shop underwent a metamorphosis. Although the shop's first floor still looked old and tattered, the system replaced the old, garbage items. Now, the shelves held magic tools that could even tempt expert players, including Tier 2 magic scrolls. Among the various new items, one stood out to Shifeng, surprising him. The Spirit Stone. The Spirit Stone was a special type of gemstone, a consumable. It was incredibly rare, and when equipped, it would improve players' mana perception. The improved mana perception would be useless to physical class players, but to magical class players, the Spirit Stone was a priceless treasure. Their mana perception directly affected their spell completion rates. Unlike skills, casting a spell didn't rely on physical movement. Instead, it relied on players' control over mana. Naturally, a caster with stronger mana perception would have better control of their spells. Once God's Domain's magical class players discovered the Spirit Stone, they'd go crazy over it. However, when Shifeng saw the Spirit Stone's price, he broke out in a cold sweat. Each Spirit Stone actually cost 400 ancient gold. The Spirit Stone was a consumable item and would vanish after 7 days of use, but even incredibly powerful experts would need several months to earn 400 ancient gold. As expected of the black market, the prices are all fraudulent. Shifeng realized that earning ancient gold through the Wanderer's shop alone wouldn't be as easy as he had hoped. Although the Wanderer's shop's merchandise was incredible, very few players would be able to afford any of it. As for the black market teleportation slots, the 2-star shop would only sell 20 slots each day, and the minimum price for each slot was 200 ancient gold, 10% of which would go to the shop's owner. Even if all 20 sold for the minimum price, Shifeng would earn 400 ancient gold from the Wanderer's shop each day. It was an absurd amount. Players would be lucky to earn 200 ancient gold from ordinary 2-star grocery stores or smithies each day. With the Wanderer's shop, on the other hand, a player could earn double that through the teleportation slots alone. And that was only the beginning. As the shop's traffic and transaction volume increased, more teleportation slots would become available for purchase, increasing the shop's total income. It's no wonder why the various superpowers were so desperate to own a Wanderer's shop. Every Wanderer's shop is a goldmine. The daily profit from one of these shops can rival 1/5 of the income from a newly captured fortress in the Gravity Mountain range. As Shifeng browsed the shop's wares, he determined that he could earn 500 ancient gold per day if sales were good. Even the well-established first-rate powers in Dragonheart City only earned that much ancient gold per day. As for the Gravity Mountain range's fortresses, players couldn't just capture one on a whim. Unlike other fortresses, a power would need a large number of experts to garrison the Gravity Mountain range's fortresses long-term. Swarms of monsters would attack the fortresses every day, and the amount of manpower needed to run a fortress was no trivial matter. Not even ordinary superpowers would have the necessary strength to secure and profit from one of these fortresses. In comparison, the Wanderer's shop could generate 1/5 of a newly captured fortress's income without any risk. System: the Wanderer's shop has been upgraded. Do you wish to open it to the public? Chapter 2248, Blackheart Shop. Chapter 2248, Blackheart Shop. Shifeng immediately agreed to open the Wanderer's shop to the public after hearing the system notification. Although it was possible to hire more NPC staff and renovate the shop after the upgrade to 2-star status to lure in more customers, Shifeng did not have the money to do so. He only had 1,000 ancient gold remaining, and every item and service in Dragonheart City cost ancient coins. Players even had to pay to enter the World Tower. To enter the World Tower's first floor, where the Gravity Mountain range was located, a team had to pay 5 ancient copper per player. If one wished to explore the World Tower's second floor, it would cost 1 ancient gold per player. Dining in Dragonheart City was also very expensive. However, it was an unavoidable expenditure as the food and drink in Dragonheart City accelerated stamina and concentration regeneration, as well as expelling the otherworld energy that infected players' bodies, allowing players to re-enter the World Tower sooner. This was also why minor powers couldn't survive in Dragonheart City. Otherwise, the World Tower would have been crowded with players since it was such a wonderful place to level up and obtain resources. Players wouldn't need to waste hours traveling to high-level maps, subjecting themselves to strange energies. Shifeng planned to bring Zero Wings members to develop in Dragonheart City in the near future, so he couldn't afford to waste money. Most importantly, He needed to pay 3,000 ancient gold once every 10 days to maintain the Wanderer's shop. It was best that the shop started conducting business as soon as possible. Shortly after the Wanderer's shop opened to the public, an NPC entered the shop to sell his item. Surprisingly enough, the NPC was selling a Tier 2 skill book. Unfortunately, his asking price was 60 ancient gold. Not long after this NPC entered the shop, players began to cross its threshold. These players had only intended to window shop, but once they saw the available merchandise, they froze, their feet glued to the ground. Crap! Isn't this a resurrection scroll? These are even rare in Empire's auction houses. The last one I saw even went for 200 gold, yet this place is only selling it for 50 gold. Take a closer look. It cost ancient gold, not normal gold. The players' eyes glowed with excitement when they saw the shop's merchandise, but once they saw the listed prices, that excitement vanished. Well-known adventurer team experts like themselves could save up 50 gold, but even if they sold everything they had on them, they still wouldn't have 50 ancient gold. Yet, every item in the Wanderer's shop cost ancient gold. When Shifeng heard this group curse the Wanderer's shop for its blackheart prices, he couldn't help but shake his head and chuckle. He had felt the same in the past. Despite being the guild leader of a second-rate guild, the Wanderer's shop's goods had been too expensive for him. Needless to say, adventurer team members wouldn't fare any better. Shifeng then left the shop and hurried toward the agreed-upon meeting place to meet up with Melody and the others. Since the Wanderer's shop was now open for business, it would only be a matter of time before the various major powers in the city discovered it. He would not have to worry about the black market teleportation slots selling. He had also left 500 ancient gold with the shop and instructed its NPC staff to purchase epic materials. He decided to refuse NPC's other items since he couldn't afford them at the moment. He could only slowly accumulate ancient gold through the Wanderer's shop. After a few minutes, Shifeng arrived at a bar in the city's inner area. The bar was called the Blue Rose, and as soon as he arrived, he discovered Melody's group, happily chatting with a level 79 Tigerkin Berserker. Not only was this Tigerkin Berserker very high-leveled, but his equipment was also quite impressive. The Berserker currently wore the Raging Punishment set, a level 75 Feingold set equipment. His two-handed axe also gave off the glow effect unique to epic items. The wild and powerful aura he radiated was even powerful enough to deter first-rate guilds' peak experts. Moreover, Shifeng could tell he was a refinement realm expert by the Tigerkin's movements. The Tigerkin Berserker's strength was even stronger than Melody. "Big brother Black Flame, have you settled your affairs?" Blue Bamboo asked when she saw Shifeng enter the bar. They're done." Shifeng nodded. "You're just in time. Here, let me introduce you. This is my friend, Swimming Dragon. He's the commander of the Dragon Riders adventurer team," Melody said. She then turned to Swimming Dragon and continued, "This is Zero Wing's guild leader, Black Flame. So, you're that famous Sword King." Swimming Dragon looked at Shifeng in surprise. As Dragon Riders mainly operated on Dragonheart Island, Swimming Dragon was not particularly familiar with guilds and experts outside of his home base. However, the top 50 experts on the God's Domain experts list were a different story. Furthermore, Shifeng's rank had recently risen on the experts list. In the latest issue, Shifeng had been ranked 14th. The man was difficult to miss. Although the God's Domain experts list was not a clear indicator of an expert's strength, those who could earn a high rank were definitely extraordinary. However, Shifeng didn't seem any different than an average person as he sat before Swimming Dragon. If not for Melody's introduction, he might have dismissed the guild leader as an ordinary player. He couldn't sense the imposing aura that was typical of powerhouses. In fact, Shifeng's aura felt quite weak. "Hello," Shifeng replied with a slight nod. After a brief introduction, Swimming Dragon informed the group of what he had learned about the pathway to the Western continent. However, to everyone's disappointment, the pathway didn't actually exist. Players had simply discovered a king-class sea monster a short distance away from Dragonheart Island. Based on what the various superpowers had discovered, this sea monster had a chance of dropping a teleportation stone that could transport players to the Western continent. The various superpowers had only spread the news because of how powerful the king-class sea monster was. There was also a group of powerful sea monsters protecting this king-class, and it would take more than 2 superpowers to take the king-class sea monster down. Hence, the various superpowers intended to use the various major powers' strength for the raid. When they found this out, the various naval powers that had gathered in Dragonheart City hurried toward the island nearest to the king-class sea monster. They would begin the raid once they had enough overall combat power. Swimming Dragon had voiced his intentions to join the raid to see if he could get a piece of the pie. Melody's group was interested in taking a look, as well. Naturally, Shifeng wouldn't refuse this opportunity and decided to travel to the island with Swimming Dragon and the others. There are so many people here. Blue Bamboo was astonished when she saw the number of ships in the port. There were usually plenty of ships in Dragonheart City's port, but right now, there were at least 10 times more ships than normal. Just leaving the port was a challenge. It will take too long to get to Tranquil Mine Island by ship. Dragonheart City has a specialized transport ship that travels to that island. The trip will be easier if we take the transport ship, Swimming Dragon said. Previously, I've already asked someone to purchase our tickets. We can just get on board the transport ship directly. After saying so, Swimming Dragon led Shifeng and the others to the transport ship's dock. Players crowded around the docked transport ship, everyone waiting to board. With no other choice, Shifeng and his latest companions patiently waited in line. After waiting for more than half an hour, it had come time for Shifeng's group to board the ship, but suddenly, 2 burly men approached them. One of these players was level 78, while the other was level 79. When the surrounding players saw these men, they promptly stepped out of the way and did their best to avoid meeting their eyes. Both of these experts possessed powerful backgrounds in Dragonheart City, and ordinary experts wouldn't dare provoke them. Swimming, I've heard you've purchased tickets to board the ship. Give them to me, I'm in a rush, the level 78 shield warrior said, grinning at Swimming Dragon. Relax, I won't just take advantage of you. I'll pay the favor back later. You're too late, Iron Hand. I've already given my tickets away, Swimming Dragon said, shaking his head. Does that matter? People are easy to replace. Tell me who they are, and I'll negotiate with them. I'm sure they'll gladly agree to give me their tickets, the shield warrior named Ironhand said, laughing. Chapter 2249, Stormy Situation. Chapter 2249, Stormy Situation. Swimming Dragon's expression darkened at Ironhand's words. Stop messing around, Iron Hand. The Dragon Riders Adventurer team is working under Heaven's Blade. Swimming Dragon warned. The shield warrior, Iron Hand, was nobody of significance. Like Swimming Dragon, Iron Hand was only a refinement realm expert. However, the Nine Snakes Adventurer team stood behind the man. Plenty of powers operated on Dragonheart Island, and the various adventurer teams ruled over a significant portion. Naturally, the island's top 10 adventurer teams led the way. These 10 adventurer teams were extremely powerful and had support from various corporations. They walked the path of the elite and had a large number of capable experts. In terms of strength, these top 10 adventurer teams were even stronger than the various first-rate guilds on Dragonheart Island. Meanwhile, Nine Snakes was one of the top 10 adventurer teams. Due to Nine Snakes' position on Dragonheart Island, the adventurer team's members were particularly arrogant. Unfortunately, very few players and powers had the strength to put Nine Snakes in its place. As a result, most of the adventurer teams and independent players on Dragonheart Island tried to avoid Nine Snakes members as much as possible. The Sea of Death situation wasn't like that of the main continent. Not only was the competition here extremely intense, but the consequences for dying were also more severe. On land, players would only lose a piece of equipment and a level if they were killed. Out at sea, however, one would lose a ship. These ships were the key to naval players' survival. Without a ship, naval players' development would stagnate. Of course, as Dragon Riders was a well-known adventurer team as well, it had caught the eye of many powerful adventurer teams. As a result, Dragon Riders could ally itself with one of these adventurer teams for protection. The adventurer team Dragon Riders had chosen to ally with was none other than the Heaven's Blade adventurer team. Like Nine Snakes, Heaven's Blade was also one of the top 10 adventurer teams on Dragonheart Island. You think Heaven's Blade is that awesome? Do you know who this expert beside me is? Ironhand asked, sneering. This is the War Blood adventurer team's newly promoted team leader, Snowy Afterglow. He's that genius from War Blood. Swimming Dragon's expression turned serious as he looked at the slightly arrogant-looking level 79 berserker youth beside Ironhand. Practically every adventurer team on Dragonheart Island knew the name Snowy Afterglow. The man had become one of War Blood adventurer team's team leaders despite being only 22 years old. War Blood was the third-ranked adventurer team on Dragonheart Island, and overall, it was even stronger than Nine Snakes and Heaven's Blade. In fact, the two adventurer teams combined might not be a match for War Blood. It was no exaggeration to say that War Blood was half as strong as a superpower. Of course, one had to be a peak expert to become one of its team leaders. That's right, and we're in a hurry. We don't have time to waste with you, Ironhand snapped, annoyed. His gaze then shifted to Shafong and the others before he said, I've never seen you before. You guys must be Swimming Dragon's friends, right? I'll get straight to the point. Give me 2 of your tickets. If anyone tries to give you a hard time on Dragonheart Island, you can give them our names. After all was said and done, Swimming Dragon commanded Dragon Riders, one of Heaven's Blade's subordinate adventurer teams, so Ironhand couldn't take his ticket from him. However, he shouldn't have any problems taking one of his companions' tickets. When the nearby players heard Ironhand's demand, they gave Shafong's group envious looks. Earning Ironhand's favor was worth the price of a ticket, not to mention Snow Afterglow's. PvP was more common in the Sea of Death than it was on the main continent, and without sufficient strength, surviving here would be impossible. If one were protected by a VIP like Ironhand or Snowy Afterglow, they could develop on Dragonheart Island without worry. The only problem was the blow one would suffer to their reputation by conceding their tickets. Unfortunately, there wasn't much Swimming Dragon could say against it. It might not have been an issue if Ironhand had been alone, but he couldn't afford to offend Snowy Afterglow. Heaven's Blade might not protect him from the young man. However, Melody and the others were his friends, and he couldn't let someone bully them out of their tickets. As Swimming Dragon was about to offer his own ticket, Shafong, who had been silent throughout the conversation, opened his mouth and snarled, "Scram." With one word, silence fell over the area. Even the adventurer team expert players who hadn't been paying attention, happy chatting among themselves, stopped and turned toward Shafong. This situation was simply too shocking to ignore. Has this guy lost his mind? Based on his looks, he must be new to Dragonheart City. He probably doesn't know who Snowy Afterglow is. The various adventurer team players were already used to the arrogance Nine Snakes members displayed. Moreover, Nine Snakes' influence on Dragonheart Island had been growing stronger recently. Anyone with more than half a brain would avoid picking a fight over such a small issue. And yet, someone had actually dared to provoke a Nine Snakes member. This was the first time anything like this had occurred on Dragonheart Island. Furthermore, Ironhand was accompanied by one of War Blood's newest team leaders. By disrespecting both Ironhand and Snowy Afterglow, Shafong had practically sacrificed his development on Dragonheart Island and in the Sea of Death. Shafong's response even stunned Ironhand for a moment. After snapping out of his daze, Ironhand coldly asked, "Are you looking to die?" "What? You want to try me?" Shafong shot back, smirking at Ironhand. "Good. I'll remember you." Ironhand growled as he glared at Shafong. Strangely calm, the two experts left. However, none of the watching players were surprised by Ironhand's reaction. They were still in Dragonheart City, and anyone that tried to assault another player was simply suicidal. Not even the War Blood adventurer team would dare attack another player inside the city. There wasn't a single power in the game that could contend with the NPC soldiers that patrolled this city. That guy is dead for sure. His life in the Sea of Death is likely over now. Not even Swimming Dragon can protect him. Regardless, it was awesome to see Ironhand so pissed. Many of the expert players on the docks flashed Shafong pitying looks. There would now be bad blood between Shifeng and the Nine Snakes adventurer team, and Nine Snakes members were well known for seeking vengeance for the smallest insult. Iron Hand definitely wouldn't let this matter rest. While the crowd quietly discussed the disruption, Shifeng's group boarded the transport ship without any more interruptions. They then made their way toward Tranquil Mine Island. As this was the first time they had boarded a transport ship, Blue Bamboo and Thoughtful Rain were surprised by the ship's size. The transport ship was almost as large as a destroyer in the real world, with a total of 4 floors. It was considerably larger than God's Domain's sailboats. There were even break rooms on the ship, which would accelerate players' stamina and concentration recovery. No other ship had this ability. Moreover, the transport ship was very fast, even faster than a bronze speedboat. It was the ideal ship for most players who wished to develop out at sea. It's a pity that only NPCs can own transport ships. If players like us could own one, we wouldn't have to worry about our development at sea, Thoughtful Rain said. When she had inspected the break room's effects, she had discovered that time flowed differently in these rooms. The time in the break rooms passed as quickly as it did in the real world, which meant that the travel time players experienced would be halved while they rested. They wouldn't have to be bored or irritated that the journey took so long. Transport ships, huh? When Shifeng heard Thoughtful Rain's comment, he remembered a shipyard in Dragonheart City. It was a large shipyard that was capable of producing a unique transport ship. Although that ship wouldn't be as powerful as the transport ship they currently rode, it had a transport ship's basic functions. Back when player-owned transport ships had emerged in the past, it had caused quite a commotion among the various naval powers. Players had only discovered which shipyard had been responsible for these transport ships after in-depth investigations. However, a superpower had long since purchased the large shipyard in question by then. Players had only started developing on Dragonheart Island, and the shipyards here were still extremely expensive. Even the cheapest shipyard cost 80,000 ancient gold, a price only superpowers could afford. However, the various superpowers were busy contesting over Dragonheart City's shops. They had no time to pay attention to these shipyards. If Shifeng could purchase the large shipyard in question early on, not only would it generate a significant amount of wealth, but it would also drastically increase Zero Wing's naval strength. While Shifeng pondered over how to earn a large sum of ancient gold as quickly as possible, Swimming Dragon approached with a worried expression. Guild leader Black Flame, Nine Snakes, the adventurer team Iron Hand that belongs to, is one of the local tyrants on Dragonheart Island. I don't think we should participate in the joint sea monster raid near Tranquil Mine Island. Nine Snakes will definitely try to pull something to punish us, Swimming Dragon said. Although Swimming Dragon knew that Shifeng was very powerful, they were in the Sea of Death. The rules here were drastically different than those on land. Otherwise, the various adventurer teams wouldn't have been able to secure territory on Dragonheart Island despite so many superpowers present. Relax. I know what I'm doing, Shifeng said, chuckling. He did not bother to explain further. Swimming Dragon sighed inwardly. He thought that Shifeng was acting a little too full of himself. He simply didn't know how powerful naval adventurer teams were. After a little over 2 hours, the transport ship finally docked on Tranquil Mine Island. A thick layer of dark fog enveloped Tranquil Mine Island, and other than the port, a ghostly atmosphere devoured the island. Once players set foot on the island, they'd succumb to a chill, and their reaction speeds would significantly decrease. Players could even freeze to death if they lingered for too long on the island. This was practically an island of death. However, the port was full of bronze and mysterious iron speedboats. There were even a few sailboats here. The scene was even grander than in Dragonheart City's port. Shortly after the transport ship docked and just as Shifeng and the others were about to step onto the wooden platform, they discovered a group of players before the transport ship. Every one of these players emitted a dense killing intent, and a few of them had already reached level 80. Even an expert like Swimming Dragon was afraid as he felt these players' dangerous auras washed over him. Meanwhile, 2 familiar figures led this group of experts, and they were none other than Iron Hand and Snowy Afterglow. Brat, you were quite bold earlier. Would you dare repeat yourself now? Iron Hand demanded, sneering at Shifeng. Chapter 2250, A Person You Shouldn't Provoke. Chapter 2250, A Person You Shouldn't Provoke. When the players on the transport ship saw the small fleets around them, they couldn't help but grow nervous. Combat was a daily occurrence for Dragonheart Island's players, whether it be against sea monsters or players. Although large-scale naval PvP was common as well, none of those battles had involved a fleet as powerful as the one around the transport ship. Over 20 speedboats had the larger ship surrounded, 8 of which were bronze speedboats, and 1 was mysterious iron rank. Nine Snakes' grand display of strength even surprised the other powers on Tranquil Mine Island, not to mention the players aboard the transport ship. These powers' upper echelons immediately ordered an investigation into this matter. "We're doomed." Swimming Dragon stared at Nine Snakes' fleet with a grim expression. He hadn't expected Iron Hand to be so vicious. An ordinary adventurer team would be fortunate to have a single advanced speedboat in their fleet. The Dragon Riders were lucky enough to have 2 bronze speedboats, which were the reason that the adventurer team had become quite famous and gained some influence on Dragonheart Island. Yet, the Nine Snakes adventurer team had dispatched a mysterious iron rank and 8 bronze-ranked speedboats. Even if they could sprout wings and fly, they wouldn't escape Nine Snakes' encirclement. Unlike on land, there wasn't anywhere players could flee to at sea, especially when they were surrounded by a powerful enemy. Even if they had a bronze speedboat on their side, escape would be impossible. "Are we in trouble, Big Brother Dragon?" Blue Bamboo asked curiously. Since she was not familiar with naval players' ways, she didn't understand why everyone seemed so nervous about the few speedboats around them. "Trouble is an understatement," Swimming Dragon replied, gesturing to an elementalist aboard Nine Snakes' mysterious iron speedboat with a bitter smile. This elementalist was clad in pitch-black robes and wore a silver mask. "If we only had to face Iron Hand, I could find a way out of this, but that is Nine Snakes' vice-commander, Undefeated Star. He used to be the Nine-Star family's vice-guild leader, but he left the super first-rate guild a few years ago for some unknown reason and joined Nine Snakes. He is also one of the few naval legacy holders in the Sea of Death. Countless seafaring players dreamed of obtaining a naval legacy. Naval legacies might not be of much help, or any, to players on land, but they could help a seafaring player become an overlord on the open water. Picking a fight with a naval legacy holder at sea was suicidal. After listening to Swimming Dragon's explanation, the other players on the transport ship turned to Chiffon. Sure enough, the Nine Snakes adventurer team really shouldn't be provoked. That guy might have enjoyed a moment of glory, but now, he'll pay for it. I hadn't thought that Nine Snakes would respond so ruthlessly. Even Undefeated Star is here. Friend, Undefeated Star is vicious. It's best if you apologize. Otherwise, they might hunt you down and kill you back to level 0. I've heard that Undefeated Star has a special tool that can double the death penalty, and Nine Snakes has quite a few expert trackers. Another adventurer team's commander had provoked Undefeated Star not that long ago and lost over 10 levels as a result. That commander had no choice but to lead his adventurer team away from the Sea of Death. Many of the players on the transport ship pitied Chiffon. If he hadn't acted so rashly earlier, he wouldn't be in this situation. Some kind-hearted players even offered him advice. Being able to mingle on Dragonheart Island was already proof of one's strength, and everyone present knew how difficult it was to reach this point in the game. Losing 10 levels would be more than enough to despair over, not to mention dying back to level 0. "Punk, if you accept your death and obediently hand over all of your equipment, we might consider letting the insult slide," Iron Hand shouted. "It's only a ship ticket, Iron Hand. Do you really have to make such a fuss over this?" Swimming Dragon pleaded through gritted teeth, stepping forward. "Will you let me apologize for my friend?" "Why would I want an apology?" Iron Hand snapped, disgusted. "I had to mobilize Nine Snakes' mysterious iron speedboat just to get to Tranquil Mine Island. Do you really think an apology can make up for that? I know you're a righteous person, Swimming Dragon, but your friend has disrespected our adventurer team. Do you think we can let him get away with that without paying a price?" Undefeated Star asked Swimming Dragon before shifting his gaze toward Chiffon. "What do you want?" Chiffon asked. "Kneel, apologize to my friend, and offer 1,000 ancient gold as compensation. Do that, and we'll consider this matter settled, Undefeated Star said as he gestured to Snowy Afterglow, who stood beside him. 1,000 ancient gold? 9 Snakes really is ruthless. An ordinary adventurer team on Dragonheart Island would be lucky to have a few dozen ancient gold. I'm not sure even well-known adventurer teams can fork out 1,000 ancient gold. Many of the spectating players gasped when they heard Undefeated Star's demands. Every player on Dragonheart Island knew how difficult it was to acquire ancient gold coins, yet Undefeated Star demanded 1,000 ancient gold as compensation, in addition to an apology. Undefeated Star was practically shoving Shifeng toward his doom. Isn't this going a little too far, Vice Commander Star? My Dragon Riders adventurer team is working under Heaven's Blade. I hope that you will consider taking a step back out of respect for Heaven's Blade. Swimming Dragon tried to reason with the man again. Swimming Dragon hoped that he could convince Undefeated Star to back off by dropping Heaven's Blade's name. Heaven's Blade was the 5th-ranked adventurer team on Dragonheart Island, a rank higher than 9 Snakes. If Heaven's Blade found out that 9 Snakes refused to show respect, the larger adventurer team would take action. You're so brave to negotiate with Brother Star, Swimming Dragon. Not even Heaven's Blade's vice commanders would dare to speak to him that way, Iron Hand said, sneering at Swimming Dragon. Of course, if Commander Zwei were here, it might be a different story. Heaven's Blade had 4 vice commanders, but none of them was a match for Undefeated Star. Only Zwei, Heaven's Blade's commander, could suppress him. Swimming Dragon couldn't think of a response. He simply wasn't important enough to ask for help from Heaven's Blade's vice commanders, much less from Commander Zwei. Since 9 Snakes Undefeated Star has spoken, that guy can only pay his due. I know some people are strong enough to save him, but those powerhouses don't just show up to help anyone. None of the spectators found anything wrong with Ironhand's statement. It was true that Swimming Dragon didn't qualify to negotiate with Undefeated Star. In fact, if Undefeated Star was in a foul mood, he might decide to take out Swimming Dragon along with Shifeng. I don't know who you are, punk, but you should be careful of who you provoke in the Sea of Death, Ironhand said, smirking at Shifeng. Well, hurry up and apologize to Brother Afterglow. The moment Ironhand finished speaking, a blue sword light shot toward him. Instinctively, he tried to defend himself, but the attack had been too fast. The sword light had sliced through him, devouring all of his HP. Ironhand tried to speak, but his vision had already darkened, and his body fell to the deck of the ship. His corpse then transformed into particles of light and left behind a piece of equipment. What incredible attack speed! Shocked by the abrupt attack speed, the watching crowd gasped. Almost as one, they all turned toward the attack's origin. To their surprise, the attacker was none other than Shifeng, the player who had dared to provoke the 9 Snakes adventurer team. Just who are you? Undefeated Star watched Shifeng carefully after Ironhand's body had vanished. A person you shouldn't provoke, Shifeng said, chuckling as he sheathed Killing Ray and stared back at Undefeated Star. Chapter 2251, Fury. Chapter 2251, Fury. Silence fell over the area after Ironhand's death, and everyone stared at Shifeng in shock. He's dead. Swimming Dragon muttered, utterly stupefied after watching Ironhand's body transform into particles of light and disappear. However, he wasn't just shocked that Ironhand hadn't responded to the attack in time to save himself and died instantly as a result. Rather, Shifeng's decisiveness astounded him. Swimming Dragon had known that Shifeng wouldn't tolerate humiliation, especially since Zero Wing had become a pseudo-super first-rate guild. As Zero Wing's guild leader, Shifeng was like a king. If he weren't, Melody wouldn't be working so hard to strengthen her relationship with him. However, Zero Wing might be Star Moon Kingdom's absolute overlord, but there were plenty of overlords on Dragonheart Island. The weakest guilds on the island was a first-rate guilds, and even they had to show 9 Snakes respect. The adventurer team was simply that powerful. This was also why Swimming Dragon had been trying to ease the tension between Shifeng and 9 Snakes, yet all of his efforts were for nothing. Not only had Shifeng slain Ironhand, but he had spoken so arrogantly to Undefeated Star in front of a large crowd. It was akin to a slap in the face. Powers like 9 snakes, which prioritized their reputations, wouldn't take this insult lying down. We're truly doomed now. Swimming Dragon couldn't help his bitter smile when he saw Undefeated Star's ashen complexion. Undefeated Star was one of the top-ranked experts on Dragonheart Island. Moreover, he was accompanied by his squad of powerful bodyguards, all of which carried a special item that allowed them to form a specific magic array. This magic array would massively boost these bodyguards' strength when they were on the open ocean. Every one of these bodyguards was like a humanoid sea monster when the array was active. Because of this, very few people dared to disrespect Undefeated Star. Even Heaven's Blade's vice-commanders treated the man with respect. "You are the first person to speak to me in such a way in the Sea of Death," Undefeated Star said, staring at Shafong like he was a dead man walking. "Let's see whether or not I can afford to provoke you. Wolf, I want him to suffer 100 deaths today." Every one of Undefeated Star's last few words had been spoken in an incredibly chilling tone. Even unrelated players shuddered when they heard it. Understood, a man named Devouring Wolf, who stood beside Undefeated Star, replied. Devouring Wolf then led the dozen or so bodyguards in a charge against Shafong. Not only were these bodyguards all level 79, but they were also experts that had followed Undefeated Star when he had left the 9 Stars family, giving up his position as vice-guild leader. Every one of them was a veteran refinement realm expert. As these bodyguards approached Shafong, magic runes began to appear on their bodies. At the same time, a gigantic magic array, covering a 300-yard radius, appeared in the sky above them. As the array manifested, the bodyguards' basic attributes began to rise. Their auras also underwent a tremendous transformation. Now, they felt more like ancient sea monsters rather than human players. Careful. Their basic attributes are higher than a great lords of the same level while they're in the magic array. You can't face them head-on. Swimming Dragon hurriedly warned Shafong. Thanks. Shafong responded to Swimming Dragon's warning with a light nod. So what if you know about the magic array? You might be able to avoid a fight with one of us, but can you avoid us all? Devouring Wolf, the bodyguard's leader, asked disdainfully. Devouring Wolf swung his battle axe at Shafong, and the weapon's strength was even high enough to warp space around it. However, before the battle axe could come anywhere near Shafong, the swordsman used Killing Ray to deflect the attack. The moment the sword and axe collided, an intense shockwave shook the player's surroundings. The clash of metal echoed throughout the magic array. Surprisingly, Shafong didn't stumble backward after the exchange, yet Devouring Wolf's expression changed as if he had just seen a ghost. How is his strength so high? Shock and confusion filled Devouring Wolf's mind as he glanced down at his trembling arms and the 1000+ HP he had just lost. He was as strong as a sea monster while the magic array affected him. He even had enough strength to frighten a peak MT. However, when his axe had met Shafong's sword, he had actually taken damage. Swimming Dragon gaped at the two fighting players. Devouring Wolf wore even better equipment than he did, and while the magic array affected the bodyguard, even he'd have to activate a berserk skill to match Devouring Wolf's strength. However, Devouring Wolf had taken damage after charging at Shafong. Not bad. I can see why 9 Snakes has become one of Dragonheart Island's top 10 adventurer teams, Shafong said, chuckling at Devouring Wolf's frightened expression. Now that you've attacked me, I should return the favor. Shafong then swung Twilight Blade. A sword light sliced at Devouring Wolf, and although he had seen it coming, he hadn't been able to keep up with the attack's speed no matter how hard he tried to block it with his axe. In the end, Devouring Wolf could only watch as the sword light passed through his body. His HP then plummeted, only stopping after it had hit 0. A moment later, Devouring Wolf's vision faded to black, and his body collapsed to the deck of the transport ship. Devouring Wolf was dead. Despite their many years of combat experience, Undefeated Star's other bodyguards were stunned when they saw this. For a moment, they even forgot to surround and attack Shafong. However, Shafong did not wait for these players to recover from their daze, and he charged forward. Shadow Blade. Immediately, 10 sword lights flew at the remaining bodyguards. After acquiring the Arctic bloodline, Shifeng had practically become a Tier 3 player. He only lacked the ability to use Tier 3 skills. The difference between Tier 2 and Tier 3 players was even larger than the difference between Tier 1 and Tier 2. The most obvious difference was the player's reaction speed. It was no longer a gap that could be shortened through basic attributes. Every one of Undefeated Star's bodyguards died in less than 20 seconds, and as a result, the magic array vanished. The only evidence that they had been here was the several equipment pieces they had left behind. Vice Commander Star, do you still think you can afford to provoke me? Shifeng calmly asked as he sheathed his swords. Chapter 2252, Shocking Tranquil Mine Island. Chapter 2252, Shocking Tranquil Mine Island. Shifeng's words, combined with the fact that all of Undefeated Star's bodyguards were now dead, stunned the spectating players. They had ridiculed him for his ignorance and arrogance, yet now, they were silent, staring at Shifeng as if he were a frightening monster. On the other hand, Swimming Dragon's eyes were so wide they might fall from their sockets. Staring at Shifeng, Swimming Dragon unconsciously muttered to himself, "Isn't he a little too strong?" Although Swimming Dragon had known that Shifeng was extraordinarily strong, he hadn't dreamed that the swordsman was this powerful. Swimming Dragon had seen many peak experts before, but the difference between them and Shifeng was like the difference between heaven and earth. If he hadn't known that Undefeated Star's bodyguards had been trying to kill Shifeng, he would have suspected that they had been putting on a play, with Shifeng as the hero. Those bodyguards' basic attributes were monstrous, and their combat standards were no weaker than his. Even Zwei, Heaven's Blade's commander, would have to retreat from Undefeated Star's bodyguards if they ganged up on him. None of those players feared death, and they were more than willing to disregard their defense to go blow for blow with their opponents like lunatics. However, those bodyguards had been as weak as toddlers before Shifeng. The swordsman had only needed one hit to kill each of those players. He had acted as if that fight had been nothing more than a walk in the park. Shifeng's strength was simply inhuman. Swimming Dragon couldn't help but turn toward Melody, who stood beside him. He had wondered why she and her companions had tolerated Shifeng's rash actions. Their opponent was Nine Snakes, one of Dragonheart Island's top 10 adventurer teams, but after this latest display, it seemed they didn't have to worry about dissuading Shifeng. What Swimming Dragon didn't realize, however, was that Melody and her companions were just as shocked as he was. Of course, they had been confident in Shifeng's prowess, not worried that he'd have issues when dealing with Nine Snakes. Even if Nine Snakes were Dragonheart Island's local tyrant, the adventurer team wouldn't find a domain realm expert like Shifeng easy to deal with. Even if the swordsman weren't a match for Nine Snakes, he was more than capable of evading their grasp. Only, Melody and the others hadn't thought that Shifeng would be this strong, even able to kill strengthened refinement realm experts without activating a berserk skill. Shifeng's basic attributes were simply heaven-defying. "It seems you're not all talk after all," Undefeated Star said suddenly, laughing. Contrary to everyone's expectations, Undefeated Star had remained calm, even after watching his bodyguards die. "However, this isn't some competition. You might be able to deal with a dozen or so players, but do you think your basic attributes can outmatch players with active berserk skills? If I send expert group after expert group to attack you, how long do you think you'll last? Moreover, we are on an island right now, surrounded by the sea. Don't think you can escape me." As soon as Undefeated Star finished speaking, another group of a dozen or so players stepped forward, sneering at Shifeng. Their combat standards might not be as high as the bodyguards, but their equipment was just as high quality. Moreover, every one of them possessed berserk skills. If they activated their berserk skills, their basic attributes would be even higher than the bodyguards, who had been strengthened by the magic array. Crap. Undefeated Stars aiming for a rotational battle. Swimming Dragon's expression darkened. Shifeng's strength was shocking, but they were still out at sea. These players didn't fight like those on land. On land, one could simply flee from an opponent with an active berserk skill, waiting until the duration ended, but an island was only so large. Where could players possibly run to? Moreover, Shifeng was greatly outnumbered. Even if he activated his own berserk skill and widened the gap in basic attributes, Undefeated Star's subordinates could take their time, dragging the fight out and waiting for Shifeng's berserk skill to end. Once it did, hundreds of experts with berserk skills would besiege Shifeng. You're really quite brave to insist on provoking me. Unfortunately, you simply don't know how foolish it is to make me your enemy at sea, Undefeated Star said, glaring at Shifeng. However, he did not hurry to order an attack. He enjoyed seeing his opponent's despair before him. The stronger his opponent was, the more pleasure he'd get from seeing their anguish. Are you not afraid that I'll kill you before my berserk skill ends? Shifeng asked, curious. Berserk skills had short durations, but Undefeated Star only had so many players. Shifeng only counted 100 or so Nine Snakes members. If he activated his berserk skill, he could easily take these players out within a few minutes. You think our adventurer team has so few members on this island, punk? A bald man beside Undefeated Star spoke up, laughing. Dragonheart Island's various major powers have dispatched several hundred players to Tranquil Mine Island to raid the King-class sea monster. Some of them have sent over 1,000 members. How many players do you think Nine Snakes, an adventurer team famed for its high member count, has sent? Moreover, everyone knows that 13 Thrones, a bona fide superguild, backs Nine Snakes. Do you really think you can take on 13 Thrones? None of the watching experts commented on the bald man's statement. What he had said was true, after all. 13 Thrones' support was the reason that so many major powers feared Nine Snakes, allowing the adventurer team to develop as rapidly as it had. 13 Thrones? The revelation surprised Shifeng slightly. What? Afraid now, punk? Undefeated Star chuckled when he saw the change in Shifeng's expression. Unfortunately for you, it is too late for regrets. Nine Snakes members aren't the only ones on their way. 13 Thrones experts are almost here. How long do you think you can evade us all? This latest information made Melody and her companions nervous. Nine Snakes was enough trouble on its own. They had never thought that the adventurer team had the support of a super guild. This mess had really blown out of proportion. God's domain only had a small number of super guilds, and every one of them was an overlord. Ordinary superpowers simply couldn't compare. Guild leader Black Flame, you should leave. We'll figure out a way to stop them. If we wait until their reinforcements arrive, it will be too late to escape, Melody said in the team chat as she disembarked from the transport ship. Shifeng was Zero Wings guild leader and the main reason for the guild's success. He couldn't afford to let other players kill him. If that happened, and word spread, Zero Wings' reputation would take a massive hit. Moreover, she was responsible for inviting Shifeng on this trip, so it was imperative that she keep him safe. Thoughtful Rain also nodded her agreement, following Melody as she approached Shifeng. As the two women reached Shifeng's side, a large group of players emerged from the island's forest. This group was comprised of 9 Snakes and 13 Thrones members, led by a savage man. This man was none other than 9 Snakes commander, Half-Step Victor. Crap. How is this possible? Why is a VIP like him here? Swimming Dragon stared at Half-Step Victor in shock, unable to believe his eyes. How did they get here so soon? Melody's anxiety spiked as she watched reinforcements arrive. You're really unlucky, punk. Undefeated Star smiled when he saw Half-Step Victor's figure. If you have any last words, now's the time to speak up. When the spectating experts saw Half-Step Victor, they shook their heads and sighed. That man was a VIP that could shake Dragonheart Island with a stomp of his foot, and now that he was here, Shifeng's fate was sealed. However, while Undefeated Star and his companions basked in their assumed victory, a rugged voice echoed across the port. Star, get over here this instant. Chapter 2253, Big Shot. Chapter 2253, Big Shot. Half-Step Victor's arrival alone had surprised the various experts in the port, but when they heard what he had to say upon his arrival, they were utterly dumbfounded. What's going on? As one of the top 10 adventurer teams on Dragonheart Island, 9 Snakes was even stronger than some of the first-rate guilds in the area. It was no exaggeration to say that 9 Snakes was only inferior to Dragonheart Island's superpowers. Half-Step Victor was resoundingly famous on Dragonheart Island for his numerous victories on the battlefield. He had earned the nickname Iron-Blooded Berserker and was one of the island's publicly acknowledged top 10 berserkers. Plenty of superpowers had focused their attention on Dragonheart Island, and they had countless experts under their command. It was easy to imagine how powerful Half-Step Victor was to rank among the top 10, despite such impressive competition. When such a big shot had arrived, the crowd had immediately assumed that Shifeng was a dead man. Unexpectedly, however, Half-Step Victor had disregarded Shifeng, yelling at his own vice-commander instead. Based on the man's tone, he clearly wasn't pleased with Undefeated Star's latest behavior. Even 9 Snakes members were stunned. "You called for me, Commander?" Undefeated Star approached Half-Step Victor, confused. He had no idea what was happening, either. "Order your men to pull back immediately," Half-Step Victor snarled, glaring at Undefeated Star. "But, Commander, we haven't taught that punk a lesson yet," Undefeated Star quickly insisted. "We invited Snowy Afterglow to further our relationship with War Blood, yet that punk dared to disrespect us in front of him. If we don't deal with this properly..." "Enough. I will not repeat myself," Half-Step Victor frostily declared. Half-Step Victor commanded great respect, even on Dragonheart Island. Needless to say, his word was law within the 9 Snakes adventurer team. Not even Undefeated Star would dare to defy him. Obediently, Undefeated Star ordered his subordinates to retreat. The spectators on the docks were astonished as they watched 9 Snakes members withdraw. None of them understood what the adventurer team was up to. "They're not fighting anymore? What? Is this for real? 9 Snakes members are leaving, just like that." Undefeated Star had been adamant about killing Shifeng a moment ago, yet now, his subordinates were pulling away from the fight. The watching experts simply couldn't keep up with this situation's development. Even Melody, Swimming Dragon, and their companions were confused. They didn't understand why the adventurer team would retreat so suddenly. While everyone wondered about 9 Snakes' intentions, Half-Step Victor approached Shifeng. "Friend, this has all been a misunderstanding. I hope you won't take this matter to heart," Half-Step Victor said with an apologetic look. "Here, take this sea barrier stone as compensation for the 9 Snakes adventurer team's mishap." Half-Step Victor then revealed a fist-sized, light blue globe and handed it to Shifeng. Right now, the man looked nothing like 9 Snakes' peerless commander. Undefeated Star's eyes nearly fell from their sockets as he watched the exchange. He even wondered if the player he was looking at was the same Half-Step Victor he knew. Half-Step Victor was an overlord on Dragonheart Island, standing at the very apex of the island's experts. Even Superpow's guild leaders treated him with respect, yet now, Melody and Thoughtful Rain, who stood by Shifeng's sides, were at a loss, and Swimming Dragon stared at the swordsman as if he were some unknown god. Melody and Thoughtful Rain's group were new to Dragonheart Island, so they weren't familiar with Half-Step Victor's status and normal behavior. Swimming Dragon, however, was very familiar with what kind of person the commander was. Half-Step Victor was the Demon King of Disasters. He was absolutely ruthless. He wouldn't have been able to tame 9 Snakes' arrogant members, otherwise. He was so ruthless that not even Undefeated Star dared to show any disrespect before him. And yet, Half-Step Victor apologized and offered Shifeng compensation. It was the first time many of the spectating experts had ever seen such a thing. Moreover, the item Half-Step Victor had offered was the Sea Barrier Stone. Players outside of the Sea of Death might not be familiar with the Sea Barrier Stone, but those who frequented the map knew it was a priceless treasure. First-rate naval guilds would go crazy over the item. The Sea Barrier Stone would generate a magic array that was strong enough to suppress any sea monsters caught within. Not only would players have an easier time defeating the sea monsters, but it also increased players' chances of escaping powerful sea monsters they encountered and couldn't defeat. However, the Sea Barrier Stone only dropped from level 70+ mythic-ranked sea monsters. Mythic sea monsters were many times more difficult to defeat than mythic monsters on land. Even the various superpowers would have to pay a high price to take down such a powerful target. Hence, very few powers were willing to raid mythic sea monsters. Swimming Dragon was utterly flabbergasted that Half-Step Victor was actually willing to offer Shifeng such a precious item. "Do we know each other?" Shifeng asked. Half-Step Victor's behavior surprised him, as well. Shifeng had been prepared for a fight. Although the Nine Snakes adventurer team was quite formidable, the team had no hope against the cards he had on hand. Shifeng certainly hadn't expected Half-Step Victor to submit before him. He knew quite a bit about Nine Snakes Commander. The man was undoubtedly a ruthless player. Not only was Half-Step Victor a domain realm expert, but he would also grow into a Tier 6 Berserker god in the future. Half-Step Victor had been known as the iron-blooded war god during Shifeng's previous life. "No," Half-Step Victor said, shaking his head. "However, we have a shared acquaintance on Tranquil Mine Island. You'll understand once you meet them." A shared acquaintance. Half-Step Victor's answer confused Shifeng. He did not remember having any acquaintances on Dragonheart Island or Tranquil Mine Island. "Since that is the case, let's forget about this issue. Take me to them. Please, follow me." Half-Step Victor released a held breath, relieved after hearing Shifeng's reply. He then led Shifeng away from the docks. When the spectating crowd saw this, they were dumbfounded. Undefeated Star had been out for Shifeng's blood a moment ago, yet a big shot like Half-Step Victor had shown up, offering peace and leading Shifeng away. Moreover, Half-Step Victor smiled amicably and treated Shifeng with immense respect. For a moment, the watching experts wondered if they were hallucinating. Who is that player? For Half-Step Victor to apologize and act as a guide, he must be some kind of VIP. The spectators discussed their guesses about Shifeng's identity, but since he wore a black cloak, they couldn't learn anything about him other than the fact that he was a level 80 swordsman. They had no idea who Shifeng really was. The experts from the various major powers promptly reported the situation to their superiors, while the adventurer team players spread the news throughout the Sea of Death. For a while, Dragonheart Island was in an uproar. Chapter 2254, Sea God's Kin. Chapter 2254, Sea God's Kin. As Undefeated Star watched Half-Step Victor lead Shifeng's group to Tranquil Mine Island's inner region, he was overwhelmed with shock. "May I know what is going on here, Vice Commander Star?" Snowy Afterglow asked. As the War Blood Adventurer team's youngest team leader, Snowy Afterglow qualified to look down on Nine Snakes Vice Commanders. He wasn't a match for Undefeated Star, but his combat power did rival peak experts. Of course, Nine Snakes Commander, Half-Step Victor, was an entirely different story. Nine Snakes was far weaker than War Blood, but it was still one of Dragonheart Island's top 10 adventurer teams, and as such, Half-Step Victor stood on the same level as War Blood's commander. "I don't know, but we have to put this matter to rest. I hope Brother Afterglow can forgive us for this," Undefeated Star said, shaking his head as he smiled bitterly. Undefeated Star had assumed Shifeng had been joking. He hadn't actually thought that the man's claim was true. If even someone like Half-Step Victor had to treat Shifeng with such great respect, how could a vice commander possibly afford to provoke the swordsman? "You jest, Vice Commander Star. Encountering such an important person had made this trip worth my time," Snowy Afterglow said, chuckling. Not even he could afford to provoke someone that even Half-Step Victor clearly feared. At this moment, he only hoped that Shifeng would forget about what had happened between them. The various major powers had set up advanced tents on a vast, open plain within the Tranquil Mine Island's forest. Swimming Dragon, who had followed Shifeng, was stunned when he saw it. Every one of these tents housed a power that was much stronger than the Dragon Rider's adventurer team. With just a casual glance, Swimming Dragon noticed quite a few of Dragonheart Island's top 50 adventurer teams, and those were the powers on the edge of the clearing. As Half-Step Victor led the group toward the clearing center, Swimming Dragon noticed increasingly stronger powers, many of which were first-rate powers on Dragonheart Island. Since Half-Step Victor was their guide, Shifeng's group attracted a lot of attention as they passed. Who are those people? Half-Step Victor is treating them so respectfully, acting like a tour guide. Isn't that Swimming Dragon, the commander of the Dragon Riders adventurer team? Why is he with that group? These players weren't familiar with Shifeng and Melody's group, but they did recognize Swimming Dragon. The Dragon Riders Adventurer Team ranked among the top 100 adventurer teams on Dragonheart Island, albeit barely. Since it was a second-rate power on the island, Dragonheart Island's players would have some familiarity with the adventurer team's commander. As Swimming Dragon felt the various first-rate powers watching him, his heart pounded with excitement. Normally, Dragon Riders didn't qualify to stand on equal footing with Dragonheart Island's first-rate powers, even if it was a well-known adventurer team, yet because of Shifeng, he received these powers' attention. He had never dreamed of such a thing happening. Commander Dragon, I've caused you quite a bit of trouble. This sea barrier stone should be helpful to your adventurer team while at sea. I hope you can accept it as my apology, Shifeng said as he handed Swimming Dragon the sea barrier stone. Shifeng greatly admired Swimming Dragon's righteous behavior. The man had stood up for him, despite knowing how powerful the Nine Snakes adventurer team was. Although the sea barrier stone was a valuable item, it was useless to Shifeng. The stone was only effective against Great Lord rank and below sea monsters. Its effects against Grand Lords and mythic sea monsters would be minimal. One sea barrier stone would mean nothing to a guild of Zero Wings size. Otherwise, why would Half-Step Victor have been so willing to part with it? In comparison, the stone would provide a massive boon to a weak adventurer team with few members. How can I accept such a valuable item? I barely did anything, anyway. Swimming Dragon instinctively rejected Shifeng's offer. Guild leader Black Flame has made the offer. You should accept it, Dragon, Melody advised. Big brother Dragon, just take it. Our guild leader rarely offers gifts, Blue Bamboo chimed in. In that case, I'll take it. Realization dawned on Swimming Dragon after listening to Melody and Blue Bamboo's insistence. Turning back to Shifeng, he said, Guild leader Black Flame, if ever you find yourself in need of the Dragon Riders Adventurer Team's help, please, feel free to give us a call. We'll use everything we have to assist you. The apology had confused Swimming Dragon, but after listening to Melody and Blue Bamboo, he realized that Shifeng was trying to offer him a favor. How could he possibly ignore the opportunity to form a connection with someone that even Half-Step Victor respected? I might have to take you up on your offer in the future, Commander Dragon, Shifeng said, nodding. Dragonheart Island would become the heart of naval development in the future. If Zero Wing wanted to gain strength on the open sea, it would have to develop on the island as well. Fortunately, Swimming Dragon was familiar with matters that related to the Sea of Death, and if he could convince the Dragon Riders to become one of Zero Wing's subordinate adventurer teams, Zero Wing would have an easier time developing on the island. Most importantly, Zero Wing could recruit Dragonheart Island's independent experts through the Dragon Riders Adventurer Team. Not all of God's Domain's experts wanted to join a guild, most of them preferred adventurer teams that offered far more freedom. Swimming Dragon silently rejoiced that Shifeng was willing to accept his offer. With this connection, he wouldn't have to worry about his adventurer team's development on Dragonheart Island. He couldn't help but flash Melody a grateful look. While Shifeng and his companions chatted and followed Half-Step Victor, they quickly arrived before a 3-story-tall bronze tent. 6 level 80 Refinement Realm experts stood guard outside of the tent's entrance. Although they were only Refinement Realm experts, they radiated unique auras, which didn't feel that those of human players. Their auras resembled undefeated stars, who possessed a naval legacy, yet somewhat different. Sea God's Kin. Shifeng looked at the 6 players in surprise. Bloodlines could increase players' life ratings, but there were other items and methods that could do the same in God's domain. One of these methods involved receiving a god's blessing and becoming said god's kin. This was akin to becoming a bloodline creature. In other words, the 6 players before him were bloodline creatures. Unlike players with bloodlines, bloodline creature players didn't receive boons to all aspects. Only certain aspects were improved. Not only would the 6 Refinement Realm experts before him receive a boost to their basic attributes and physiques when fighting out at sea as a sea god's kin, but they'd also be able to trigger the bloodline abilities the sea god had granted them. Although these benefits couldn't rival those a peak naval legacy provided, they could rival an advanced legacy. In other words, these 6 Refinement Realm experts were even stronger than ordinary Refinement Realm experts. Every one of them should have the strength to rival ordinary peak experts. The only downside to becoming a sea god's kin was that players would be barred from many of the kingdoms and empires on the main continent, which weren't friendly to non-human races. Obtaining a sea god's blessing and becoming a bloodline creature wasn't an easy process, yet these 6 players had succeeded. Suddenly, a young, level 80 player emerged from the tent. His aura was similar to the guards, but more intense. Based on the young man's movements, Shafong could tell that he had reached the Void Realm and was a bona fide peak expert. "You may enter. The Lord is waiting inside," the young man said, glancing at Half-Step Victor with an indifferent gaze. "Remember, you must show respect once you're inside." Half-Step Victor nodded in response before leading Shafong and his companions into the tent. Chapter 2255, Tower of Four Gods. Chapter 2255, Tower of Four Gods. Confused, Shafong followed Half-Step Victor into the tent. Just who was this shared acquaintance that could make Half-Step Victor submit? Half-Step Victor was a domain realm expert that would be considered an apex combatant in a super guild. Even super guilds' guild leaders had to show him respect, especially at sea. Naval transportation was both dangerous and inconvenient. The sea was vast, and because of this, the various superpowers couldn't control as much of the ocean's maps as they did on land. Since the various superpowers gathered on the sea, the competition here was far more intense than on the main continent, as well. Even Melancholy, 13 Thrones guild leader, couldn't demand so much respect from Half-Step Victor. Every expert had their pride, after all, especially domain realm experts. While Shafong wondered who this acquaintance was, he and his group entered the tent's main hall. Although the bronze tent only revealed 3 floors from the outside, occupying a relatively small area, it was many times larger within. It was as if the bronze tent contained a miniature world, and its main hall was a spectacular sight to behold. As they entered the main hall, Shafong and his companions felt as if they had stepped inside an ancient shrine. A dozen level 80 experts lined the 2 walls, radiating imposing auras. Every one of these experts wore 2 to 5 pieces of epic equipment, and even the weakest player had reached the Void Realm. Their frightening auras weren't that of a human player, but of bloodline creatures or wielders of advanced naval legacies. As these experts watched Shafong's group, even Swimming Dragon broke out in a cold sweat. He couldn't help but lower his head and avoid their gazes. Blue Bamboo, on the other hand, turned deathly pale when she sensed the experts' horrific auras. Only Thoughtful Rain fared better than her companions. Even Shafong was a little astonished to see these players. These experts could likely kill Half-Step Victor with very little effort if they wished to. Shafong would have to rely on his trump cards to escape their pursuit. Among the dozen experts, Shafong sensed 6 domain realm experts, 2 of which had even progressed even further in the domain realm than he had. However, since these players held special tools and wore black masks to hide their faces, he couldn't determine their identities. He couldn't even see their current levels. There were 3 other players in the hall, 2 males and 1 female. One of the 2 men was young, while the other was older. Their female companion was a beautiful youth, and when Shafong saw the young man and woman, he was surprised to recognize both of them. The young man was none other than his old acquaintance Lu Xingluo, while the beautiful woman was Happy Art. "Elder Wu, I've brought the player you requested to see," Half-Step Victor respectfully announced as he gazed at the elderly man who sat in the hall's seat of honor. He behaved like a subordinate reporting to his superior. Elder Wu didn't radiate the terrifying aura the other experts in the room had. On the contrary, his aura felt ethereal, as if he had 1 foot in the grave. The elder was level 79, and there was no comparison between him and the other experts in the room. Shafong didn't recognize the older man at all, and he had never heard of him in this life or his previous one. However, the fear and respect Half-Step Victor showed this elder were legitimate. This wasn't some act. "You may go," Elder Wu said, nodding. Hearing this, Half-Step Victor bowed and left the hall, his usual arrogance in the sea of death nowhere to be seen. Swimming Dragon was stupefied, was so anxious he began to sweat. To Swimming Dragon's knowledge, Half-Step Victor could demand respect from Superpow's guild leaders, even if he didn't stand on equal footing, yet. While the Dragon Rider's commander wondered about the elderly man's identity, the player in question shifted his gaze to Shifeng. Shifeng felt as if this old man could look straight through him, and for a moment, even he felt a little afraid. Sure enough, the younger generation will always surpass the old. It's no wonder why Little Melancholy is so optimistic about your prospects, Elder Wu said, chuckling. Little Melancholy? Hearing the way Elder Wu referred to 13 Thrones guild leader confused Shifeng. How is he still little? Melancholy might seem young in God's domain, but that was just his appearance. The man should be nearing his 60s. Moreover, Melancholy was 13 Thrones guild leader, and he had held that position for over 2 decades. His word was practically law within his own guild. Who would dare call him little? Big Brother Black Flame, Elder Wu is 13 Thrones' largest shareholder and one of the guild's founders. You might not know of him since he had been in seclusion for some time. Our guild leader is 2 generations younger than Elder Wu, Happy Art explained in a whisper to Shifeng when she saw his confusion. The explanation stunned Shifeng. 13 Thrones had been established nearly a century ago. Initially, the guild had been supported by 2 major corporations. In other words, this Elder Wu was more than 100 years old. Although Elder Wu had the support of a super guild, it was astounding that a man like him had reached level 79 at this stage of the game. It was true that a person's physical body in the real world wouldn't impact their virtual body in God's domain. Someone as old as Elder Wu should have some mental deterioration. It was simply impossible for him to behave like a lively, young man, even in God's domain. If Elder Wu kept up with peak experts despite his extreme age, Shifeng couldn't imagine how powerful this man had been during his prime. May I know what business you have with me, Elder Wu? Shifeng asked after taking a moment to calm down. He didn't know Elder Wu, and no one of this man's status would call him here for a simple greeting. Smart young man, Elder Wu nodded approvingly. Smiling, he continued, I've heard about your situation from Little Melancholy. I'll be direct. I want Zero Wing to withdraw from the deal involving Gravity Mountain Range's fortress. My reasoning is simple. This operation involves some of 13 Thrones' valued secrets. However, Little Melancholy has still made you a promise. As compensation for breaking this promise, I will give you one of the Tower of 4 Gods teleportation stones we will obtain after raiding this King-class sea monster. The Tower of 4 Gods has existed since before the Great Destruction, and it's rumored to contain countless opportunities. Some of the current empire's founders even attributed their success to the Tower of 4 Gods. In fact, the Or Empire's founding emperor had only gained enough strength to unify the Or race, forming his empire, due to his experience in the Tower of 4 Gods. Each teleportation stone can transport 2 players into the Tower of 4 Gods. Whomever you choose to accompany you will be none of my business. Realization dawned on Shifeng after listening to Elder Wu's explanation. He had never heard of Dragonheart Island containing a path to the Western continent in the past. How could such a trip be so easy, after all? It was more likely that the rumor about the teleportation stone had been blown out of proportion as it had spread. The fact that various superpowers were keeping a tight lid on the information likely played a factor. Although the true teleportation stone didn't allow one to visit the Western continent, its ability to access the Tower of 4 Gods was just as valuable. As Elder Wu had stated, the Tower of 4 Gods was an amazing place. To be precise, it was a land for gods. Every teleportation stone that allowed entry into the Tower of 4 Gods was incomparably valuable, easily worth an epic item. What are your thoughts? Elder Wu asked. Happy Art couldn't do anything about this situation due to Elder Wu's immense authority within 13 Thrones. Not even Melancholy would dare go against this man. Lu Xingluo couldn't help his inward sneer as he glared at Shifeng. The higher-ups have forbidden me from touching you, but they never said anything about impeding your development. Don't even dream that you'll get access to Dragonheart Island through 13 Thrones. 13 Thrones was a super guild. Melancholy might be interested in Shifeng, but he wasn't the only person with authority over the guild. Although Elder Wu offered the Tower of 4 Gods teleportation stone due to the broken partnership, not everyone would find success within the tower, especially with a single teleportation stone. As Lu Xingluo felt pleased with himself for pulling this coup off, Shifeng opened his mouth and replied, "Thank you for your offer, Elder Wu, but since Zero Wing will not be participating in the fortress's capture, we will not need compensation. Zero Wing has its own strength, and we will fulfill our dreams on our own." Chapter 2256, Youthful Arrogance. Chapter 2256, Youthful Arrogance. Lu Xingluo was stunned to hear Shifeng's reply, but his lips curled into a sneer. "Black Flame, do you really think such a noble attitude will gain Elder Wu's favor?" Lu Xingluo inwardly chuckled. "Unfortunately, you've made the wrong bet. Elder Wu is not melancholy." Lu Xingluo was very familiar with Elder Wu's personality. Elder Wu was a man of his word. Since Elder Wu had promised to give Shifeng the Tower of Four Gods teleportation stone, he would ensure Shifeng took it. Rejecting the offer would only disgust Elder Wu. Moreover, the old man wouldn't mind retracting his offer after such a rejection. The experts standing guard along the hall's sides stared at Shifeng in astonishment, looking at him as if he were a fool. Has this kid gone crazy? Even if he isn't, I'm sure he is very close. Does he really think he can obtain an entry slot to the Tower of Four Gods with his strength alone? He might be trying to boast about his bravery before Elder Wu. The Tower of Four Gods entry slot presented a very rare opportunity, and only one King-class sea monster dropped the tower's teleportation stone. However, an extremely large number of powers was currently vying for these teleportation stones. There were already more than 10 superpowers preparing for the upcoming raid. At this point, only 13 Thrones was confident of securing these teleportation stones. The other superpowers had no guarantee of success. Shifeng had only recently reached Dragonheart Island, and even though Zero Wing had some naval power, it couldn't dispatch its forces to Tranquil Mine Island on such short notice. Swimming Dragon's Dragon Riders Adventurer team could help the guild by adding to its combat power, but the Adventurer team wasn't even strong enough to defeat the sea monsters that guarded the King-class sea monster, much less the main boss. The idea that Shifeng intended to rely on his strength to obtain the teleportation stones was simply a joke. However, the moment Shifeng finished his statement, he turned and left the tent. He didn't even pause to wait for Elder Wu's response. Startled, Melody and her companions followed Shifeng out of the tent. "Youthful arrogance," Elder Wu indifferently commented as he watched Shifeng leave. His gaze then shifted to Lu Xingluo as he began to address their plans, reacting as if Shifeng had never arrived. The expert guards found nothing strange about Elder Wu's reaction. They had watched many arrogant players behave as Shifeng had, and they received nothing from Elder Wu after rejecting his offers. Youthful arrogance, huh? Inwardly, Happy Art couldn't disagree with Elder Wu more. She had gained some understanding of Shifeng's mindset during her time with him in the Thunder God's secret land. He didn't act unless he was absolutely confident in succeeding. Since Shifeng had claimed that he'd secure the teleportation stones by himself, then he was confident he'd succeed. However, Happy Art couldn't help but worry. Trying to claim the Tower of Four Gods teleportation stones from the various superpowers wouldn't be easy, and they were currently out at sea. One would need ships to defeat sea monsters. If you're worried, Little Art, I can let them tag along with our fleet. At least that would give them a chance to approach the boss. It will also avoid giving the others a reason to call out our guild for being unscrupulous, a young, robust level 80 male ranger said when he noticed Happy Art's concerned expression. "Really?" Happy Art asked, giving the ranger youth an excited, joyful look. The youth before her was the commander of 13 Thrones' Third Fleet, Modern Rain. If Modern Rain were willing to help, they wouldn't have any trouble getting Shifeng's group close to the King-class sea monster. "Rest assured, if they're with me, they'll reach the boss's side," Modern Rain declared. Happy Art was 13 Thrones' prided daughter. Modern Rain was a little annoyed with how highly Happy Art thought of Shifeng, but he could use this opportunity to show off his power before the young woman. Once Elder Wu and Lu Xingluo finished their business, Happy Art and Modern Rain left in search of Shifeng. Countless ships, all belonging to the various major powers, were tied to the docks in Tranquil Mine Island's port, including hundreds of bronze speedboats, which the various well-known adventurer teams considered quite rare and precious. There were also quite a few small sailboats, and many of the expert players on the island were shocked by the spectacular scene. This was especially true when these experts saw the fleets the various superpowers had dispatched. Every fleet consisted of 100 ships, and even the weakest among them was an advanced speedboat. Each fleet had over 20 bronze speedboats and 2 or 3 mysterious iron speedboats, as well. Every one of them was led by a medium sailboat. So, this is the strength of various superpowers' foundations? Melody gazed at the fleets, surprised. These superpowers were on an entirely different level compared to Dragonheart Island's adventurer teams. Melody even spotted bronze sailboats among the multiple fleets. A single bronze sailboat was more than enough to annihilate the Dragon Riders' adventurer team. Of course, adventurer teams had their own powerhouses. Take Dragonheart Island's top 10 adventurer teams, for example. All of these top adventurer teams had their own medium sailboats as the core of their fleet. They only lacked the bronze and mysterious iron speedboats that the various superpowers employed. With so many ships heading toward the boss, I'm afraid that there won't be any room for us to squeeze through, Guild Leader Black Flame, Swimming Dragon said, smiling bitterly as he watched the powerful fleet sail toward the King-class sea monster's last known sea zone. Although Swimming Dragon was confident in his bronze speedboat, every one of the powers participating in this raid had their own bronze speedboats. It was no exaggeration to call these speedboats cannon fodder in this upcoming raid. Trying to claim a teleportation stone with a bronze speedboat was simply impossible. While the group stood in the port, watching the ships, Modern Rain and Happy Art found Shafong and approached to greet him. Big Brother Black Flame, our guild leader's initial offer was sincere. Unfortunately, Elder Wu has too much authority in the guild. Even our guild leader had no choice but to follow his wishes. Please, don't be upset with this outcome, Happy Art explained. I understand. Shafong nodded. In truth, he hadn't paid the matter much mind, to begin with. Since that is the case, why don't you tag along with us, Big Brother Black Flame? With Vice Guild Leader Rain's fleet, approaching the King-class sea monster won't be a problem, Happy Art said. Since you are Happy Art's acquaintance, Guild Leader Black Flame, please leave the journey to the boss to me, Modern Rain stated as he gestured to the bronze sailboat that was the core of 13 Thrones' third fleet. The various major powers would step aside and open a path to the King-class sea monster for 13 Thrones' third fleet. They wouldn't need to fight or squeeze through the countless ships. Thank you, but we can get there by ourselves, Shafong said, shaking his head as he rejected the offer without a second thought. Big Brother Black Flame? The response surprised Happy Art. You're going there yourselves? I don't mean to look down on you, but even if you have a relatively formidable fleet, I'm afraid that you won't even reach the mobs around the boss, not to mention with just the 5 of you, Modern Rain said, smirking. While Modern Rain spoke, however, Shafong retrieved the Thunder Eagle's flute and blew into it. The deafening screech of an eagle echoed throughout the port, heralding the arrival of a gigantic eagle with a wingspan of 20 meters. It gracefully descended from the sky, landing before Shafong. You're tuning in to the Celestial War YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories,